Hello, welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I am speaking with the lovely Iona Italia. She is a writer, editor, and translator. In this conversation, we spend a good part of the conversation talking about her various life experiences and her identity, and it's just a fascinating and wonderful discussion that we had about her and understanding all of these different components of race and ethnicity. We talk about her new book and her motivations to write it. We talk about some of the differences between memoir and autobiography. We talk about her experiences moving to Argentina and living there for a couple years and doing tango, the style of dance, and the two books she wrote on it after that. Talk about her journey to find her roots or racial and ethnic identities in India and some of her experiences there. We talked about how she's viewed by others in terms of race and ethnicity. We also talk about the distinction between Indians and Parsi Indians. We then talk about her background in Britain and more specifically her various experiences at Cambridge, which led into a discussion about English literature. She has a PhD in English literature and how she felt very much at home in Cambridge. We talked about, a broader discussion about race and ethnicity and how mixed individuals, mixed race, mixed ethnicities, those folks have a certain perspective that is a unique contribution to the discussion on race. We talked about differences between individualism and group identity and just some of the current state of politics, along with many other topics. Iona is a lovely person. She is wonderful to talk to and just has such a wealth of knowledge and has a really nice spirit about many of these issues and just in general. So now I bring you Iona Italia. I am here with Iona Italia. Iona, what's going on?
Hello, Xavier. That's correct, isn't it?
That's
that
correct.
The pronunciation?
You got
Marvelous.
it right. Yeah. How are you?
I am fine. I'm talking to a very handsome shrink who is interviewing me for his podcast. So it's a very nice afternoon.
You're much too kind. Actually, with your for listeners out there, Iona has her own podcast called Two for Tea. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I have a cup of tea here, and I don't usually drink tea this early. You're Greenwich time, right? So I'm over here on Eastern time, so it's earlier in the morning than usual. So just for you, I'm doing the British thing. How about that?
Marvelous. When I'm a guest on other people's podcasts, it is optional, but guests on my podcast have to drink tea. It is mandatory.
That's a good thing.
Since my podcast is done by Zencastr, so I don't actually see guests live, it is done on the honor system.
Okay.
We do expect people to be drinking tea, and it must be proper tea. None of that iced tea nonsense.
Yeah, no, I don't like the iced tea, which will make all my Southern listeners very upset. But I'm not, even though technically Maryland is in the South, I never got the taste for it. So I like the old fashioned tea. Do you put anything in it? I don't put anything in it. I just drink it. I don't put milk in it. I like the bitterness.
Oh dear, that is quite ethically problematic.
but I'm willing to broaden my horizons. But maybe I'm just drinking tea wrong.
Just a splash in, just for the sake of British tradition. Because we don't trust you people with tea.
No, you shouldn't.
You throw tea into the sea and wasteful things like that.
That's a great reference. Okay, so I wanted to get you on here because you're quite prolific in your all of your writing and all of the people that you interact with and your own podcast, and you're just a really good connection point. So why don't you tell listeners where just kind of a general overview of kind of what you do now and what your area of focus is, and then we can get into some of your kind of autobiographical stuff.
Sure. So I guess since 2017, mid-2017, I've been doing the kind of work that I do now. I really shifted career in mid-2017. And my main job is as the sub-editor of Ario magazine. So I am the Riker to Helen Pluckrose's Picard at Areo. Areo. Everyone always spells it wrong. It's named after, as you probably know, John Milton's famous essay in defense of free speech, Areopagitica, published in 1614. And so I'm the copy editor at Areo, and I also do various odd job things like checking references, spot checking references. I don't actually check everything. And because it's not a full-time position, and choosing images, and publicizing on social media and dealing with authors and cranky authors and things like that. And also nice authors. Most of our writers are wonderful.
Sure, yeah.
A few of them are a pain in the ass,
Yeah.
but that's great. We're still happy they write for us. And then I also do some freelancing work. I freelance as a translator. I translate German, Spanish, and French into English.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I do some freelance editing of all kinds, actually. I'm currently doing some science editing. But yeah, so I have freelance work on the side. Then I spend at least one day a week working on my podcast, my own podcast, with the help of a sound engineer, my friend Justin Ward. We do the podcast together. And I have been writing fewer articles because I've begun work on a new book. Will be my fourth book. And so I'm starting to do a little bit of research towards that. It's in rather early stages. So that's what I do. The new book the working title is called The Half-Castes. And I want to write about mixed race identity. And the way I plan to do it is through a series of mini biographies. So I begin with an autobiographical section, and then my plan is to write a short biography of different people in history who had unusual opportunities or difficulties because of their mixed race background, because they straddled two dual nationalities, dual cultures, dual ethnicities. I was originally thinking of focusing on people who are half Indian. And I haven't quite decided whether I will stick to that, but I think I might make it broader. My model is a book called Incarnations, India in 50 Lives, which it's a very famous best-selling in India. It's a bestseller, and it takes the lives of 50 eminent people through Indian history, beginning with Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and I believe it ends in the 1980s, and each of them lived in a slightly different time period, and it looks at their lives as a prism on some aspect of India. So I'm interested in doing the same thing, but looking at mixed race identities through the prism of these little biographical, little mini biographies.
Yeah, it's great. I guess what's the motivation for you for doing this or wanting to write this?
Well, I originally wanted to write a memoir about my Parsi heritage, and I decided not to write a full-length memoir about that eventually for several reasons. One is that I So my parents died when I was quite young. And although I spent my early years in Pakistan, I then moved to the UK, and I grew up with no contact with any Parsi relatives or Indian relatives. And I never went back to Pakistan, and I wasn't able to get a visa to go to India because of my Pakistani background until quite recently. So I there are a lot of people who grew up completely steeped in that culture and who therefore can give a much better account of it than I can, and who will also spot a lot of errors in my book because I don't speak fluent Gujarati. I don't know all of the Parsi trivia. I'm not super well informed about Zoroastrian theology. These are all things that I've learned as an adult.
Mhm.
So I've slightly backburnered that idea for the time being. Um, and but I am interested in um, that feeling of not being rooted in one specific place and being torn between identities. Torn makes it sound very negative, but I think it can be an opportunity, a bridge building
Mhm.
opportunity also.
Mhm.
And I was very influenced by Salman Rushdie's writing. Rushdie, of course,
Mhm.
uh, is not someone of mixed race,
Right.
but he's written a lot about syncretic cultures and also about homelessness and homesickness,
Mhm.
and in particular in his book Imaginary Homelands. So that's where the genesis of this idea came from.
Mm.
I kept a little blog when I was thinking of writing the memoirs. And if people want to check that out, maybe you can put a link in the show notes.
Mhm. Yeah, of
It's
course.
called Fire and Vultures, and you can find it on WordPress. So
Mhm.
fireandvultures.wordpress.com. Those are selections from the things that I was writing towards the memoirs. So you can get a taste for my style of writing. It's not going to be um, I like to write creative nonfiction. Not when I'm writing articles, obviously. Articles are just
Sure.
straight, argumentative, dry prose.
Right. Yeah.
But what I actually like to write in book length things is something that is more impressionistic and tries to fuse what I call imaginary memories,
Mm. Mm.
because I really don't know how reliable my memories of early childhood are, and
Mhm.
how much is suggestion and confabulation and imagination from things that I encountered much later or was told.
Yeah.
So my quote unquote memories, drawing on those and on my my sort of feelings about this,
Mhm.
and people's as well as people's attitudes and people's personal biographies. I think it's another model for me is Thomas Chatterton Williams' book, A
Yeah.
Memoir in Black and White.
Yeah. It's very good.
I thought that was an absolutely superb book. And
Yes.
he takes a similarly kind of eclectic creative nonfiction
Mhm.
approach. It's very poetic.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
also about his feelings. It's also autobiographical.
Yeah.
And he ruminates on larger, more abstract questions.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of book that I'm trying to write at the moment.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
No, that's you have great inspiration and great models. I mean, but all of the folks that you've mentioned have, good writers, and they have a really nice way of, I mean, writing memoirs or writing a autobiographical kind of thing can, if you just do like, born here, this happened when I was 7, this happened when I was 30. I mean, you can do that, but I think that there's something more to finding the creative elements of a life, and how it permeates into other aspects of society and how that, it's kind of a living thing. And so I think your template is very nice. It sounds
Thank you.
very exciting to read that.
Well, I think memoir is different from autobiography. As I understand
Sure.
it, autobiography is the account of a life, of the entire life, which of course may be of interest if you are just a public figure of intrinsic interest to people and they want to know all of the details.
Sure, yeah.
Or if you had an exceptionally swashbuckling life. Um, but a memoir is an account of a segment of your life. So either an episode, a chronological episode in your life, the 5 years I spent, for example, Ewan Morrison wrote a memoir, a fictionalized memoir of the year that he spent on the swingers scene. And that's been made into a YouTube movie called Swung, which Ewan himself hates the
Really?
movie, but it now has many millions of views. So if you're interested, please go and watch it. The movie is quite tame compared to the book. But or it can be thematic in the way that Thomas Chatterton Williams is thematic. So you're not looking at all aspects of your life, only whatever is relevant to the topic at hand. And yes, that's why I think what I want to write is not autobiography and biography, but it's memoirs.
Is maybe someday in the future you'll do the full autobiography, or no interest?
I don't. I mean, I mean, I think my life has been quite varied and interesting, but also I am. Nobody's interested in me. I mean, not nobody. I don't mean that some weepy way. I mean, in the grand scale of things, I'm not a famous person or a public figure. So people don't think, oh, I'm really interested to know what Iona's life was like. And so I'm not sure it would be helpful. I think there are some episodes that are colorful. My boarding school experiences, which were singularly bad. So I'm not sure if they were quite bad enough. They were just, unfortunately, in that awful, what's the opposite of a Goldilocks zone? Like a zone of, a narrow zone of especial badness.
There's a character that's right at the tip of my tongue, and I can't think of it, where like everything bad happens to the character.
It's like if you imagine, the Goldilocks zone is a habitable zone around a planet, around a star. If you imagine that, it's hard to imagine this, but a star that was somehow all distances from the star habitable, except for this one narrow little band. And maybe all distances from a certain distance out are habitable. And there's only just this little band very close to the star that isn't inhabitable. That's what I need. That is where my boarding school experience lies in literary sense, because it was horrible enough to be awful to live through. I wouldn't say it was traumatic, actually. I don't feel tremendously traumatized. Like I don't feel like I'm carrying wounds from that period. And I rarely find myself thinking back on it and getting angry and resentful. Very rarely, which is something I do with other episodes that have happened. When you look back and you still feel really angry about what happened. You're like,
fair enough, yeah.
Fuck them for doing that to me. I don't feel that way about the boarding school. It's like, it just seems amusing to me now. But it was awful at the time. But it wasn't awful enough that would make a really good, what is the word for this kind of fiction? There is a specific term for this, but I have forgotten. Those kinds of memoirs that are about truly dreadful childhoods, like The Glass Castle and memoirs like that. My parents were homeless alcoholics. I was sold as a child prostitute. Those kinds of memoirs. Unfortunately, for literary purposes, it's not bad enough to fall into that category. So and my experiences as a tango dancer. So I've written 2 books about tango,
Hmm.
but and I did draw on my own experiences very, very heavily, but I was really, not at all interested in writing a tango memoir, i.e., my journey through tango, what it meant to me
Right.
personally. What I was much more interested in is, um, how did my personal experiences reflect something intrinsic to the experience of dancing tango,
Mm.
which anybody, everybody's experience will be different, but which anybody might experience, which isn't personal,
Hmm.
um, and which raises kind of philosophical and psychological questions, much broader questions than questions about me.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I try to write as a sort of tango every woman.
Mm.
Um,
That's nice. Yeah, I like that.
and I think I mean, I want to do that in this case as well. I want to take the specifically my specific experiences a as the kind of British and the Indian thing,
Hmm.
to make a wider point.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just not that interesting, unfortunately.
No,
I'm just
I
kind of
mean,
verge on the verge of interesting, but not quite
right at the
not
tip.
quite getting there.
That's funny. Um, yeah, no, that's all. I mean, really, really fascinating. I think in terms of using certain parts of your life to make to illustrate, different types of things about, connection pieces for maybe for other people. I think it's really nice. I am curious though. So I've read a few things, listened to a few things that you've shared with on other places, but maybe for listeners, you can do it however you want. You have a multiplicity of identities, right? And this will probably tie into our theme about mixed race or multi ethnic kinds of uh, ways of maneuvering in the world, which when we get to that point, I can jump in as well and maybe share a little bit of my own. Um, listeners might be fatigued at this point. I've shared it a little bit already, but um, so yeah, so you kind of alluded to it. So you were born in Pakistan, is that right?
I was actually born in Scotland, and I
Okay,
went to Pakistan as an infant.
and so
So
and your
my
parents
mother,
are? What are your parents?
um, uh, so my mother was Scottish, and my father was Indian born, I
Hmm.
think.
Okay.
Um, I don't actually have evidence for this, but as far as I can tell, my father was Indian born. And I think that he was born in Bombay in the mid 1920s.
Hmm.
And should anyone listening to this have more information, so occasionally people come forward with little snippets.
Hmm.
Um, Please let me know if you know of a Barman, Bikaji, Italia. Um, Unfortunately, if he was born in hospital, he would have been born at the Parsi Lying In Hospital,
Hmm.
which I actually visited in Bombay. But they do have records going back that far, but not very complete records
Hmm.
from the 20s.
Sure.
He's not in the records, but that doesn't mean he wasn't
Hmm.
born there.
Hmm.
If he was born at home, which was very common in those days, then I also have no way of knowing. But
Sure.
I think he was born in Bombay in the 1920s, and he went to Pakistan somewhere between then and 1968, June 1968, when my parents were married in Karachi.
Hmm.
And I suspect um, there would be no reason for him being a Parsi to have gone at partition.
Hmm.
And that was clearly not a good time to travel.
Hmm.
I suspect that he went either or had already left before partition during the Raj period,
Hmm.
um, or or he left at some point in the 50s, early 60s, when Pakistan was a much more liberal place, and probably left for work reasons.
Hmm.
And he was Indian Parsi. Um, and my mother was Scottish. So uh, my mother came over pregnant, and I was born in Scotland. Um, and then she went immediately back to Pakistan. And my address on my birth certificate, the home address, not the address of the hospital where I was born, but the home address in my birth certificate says 12 Mary Road, Bath Island, Karachi, West Pakistan, because I'm older than the country of Bangladesh. Um, Get off my lawn, Bangladesh.
Very funny.
So I spent my early childhood there, and then I came to the UK. I went to boarding school here, and then I went to university. I studied English literature. I was an academic for a number of years until 2006. And then in 2006, I went to Argentina, originally just for a year, uh, in order to perfect my tango. Because I was I stayed a very long time on the kind of, I can't remember from the graph whether it's a hill or a dale or what, but on the kind of worst part of the quote unquote worst part of the Dunning-Kruger map. I remained on there, overestimating my abilities for a surprisingly long time, like for maybe a decade, which was actually, I think the Dunning-Kruger thing is very much underrated, because had I known how not so talented I was as a dancer, I wasn't crap or anything like that, but had I known that I wasn't so amazing as I thought, I would never have had all of the amazingly rich experiences I had, and I would never have um, gone and toured the States teaching and things like that. Um, had I been more realistic in my self perceptions. So anyway, I went to Argentina. I took tango lessons. Then I started teaching tango. I started writing about tango. I had a very popular blog, so people would also invite me to read and teach and give talks. And I often taught music interpretation, tango music interpretation.
Nice.
And I became an Argentine citizen.
So your sojourning there really, just wore off on you, and you just really liked it enough.
I loved the tango. I was never in love with Argentina, the country. Um, I had an uncomfortable love-hate relationship with Buenos Aires and Argentine culture, but I really was, for a long time, completely obsessed by tango. In fact, I felt that I could never, ever live anywhere else again, because nowhere else would there be as good tango dancing. And I couldn't live without having the best possible tango dancing every night of my life. I felt like that for almost 10 years.
Yeah, well, just we can park there for a minute. What is it about the tango dancing that is so activating for you, or what is it that energizes you, or what
Yes,
is it about it?
it's not as activating anymore for various reasons, which we can get into later. I haven't given it up by any means, but I've kind of moved to a new phase. We're now like old lovers who've broken up but have stayed friends. Rather than being in the throes of a torrid, passionate affair. Um,
What happened?
so um, I think that, I mean, many, many people fall in love with and get obsessive about tango. I think that um, of the kind of, I think there are a number of reasons. The first and most obvious one, and probably the most kind of universal one, is the Tango Embrace. So I don't know if you've seen tango danced, and
Yes. I mean, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
oh
I've
yeah,
seen it.
of course, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Um, so you weren't the one who was asking about Clive James, about dancing with Clive James. Oh, okay. Uh, um, uh, so, and we can, if you like, we can put a video in the show notes of
Sure.
my doing a performance,
Yeah, of course.
so readers can see what it was like.
Yeah.
Um, it's so first of all, there's the embrace, which is so intimate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just in most other partner dances, the embrace is more kind of frame-like. There's more distance
Mm.
between the bodies,
Mhm.
or you're just holding hands a
Mhm.
lot of the time. Um, and of course, it's much easier to coordinate movements if you have more physical space
Mhm.
between you. Um, Tango has a very steep learning curve at the beginning of the dance
I can imagine.
because you are holding the other person so closely that if you don't have your movements well coordinated, I was going to say perfectly, but that does not exist. If you don't have them well coordinated, then it's not just that the person, if I'm dancing with someone who dances swing who's not very good at swing, I might feel a bit kind of roughly manhandled, or they might be off the music or boring or all kinds of annoying things.
Mhm.
It might be annoying, frustrating, irritating, etc. But in tango, it's just you almost can't move.
Mhm.
You can't do your part of the movement without the other person being
Mhm.
competent as well. You really move as one.
Mm.
But that sensation, it's just you hold people in this lover, complete strangers very often,
Mhm.
in this lover-like embrace. It's
Mhm.
very romantic. I mean, in salsa, you might grind your groins together or something. But in real life, when you meet somebody and kind of romance is happening, you don't first grind your groins against them. Well,
Yes.
it depends. Maybe
Ty
Ewan
ty
Morrison did during
ty ty
his
ty
year of swinging,
typically,
but
people don't do that, but I don't know, maybe young
yeah,
people do nowadays, but, yeah, no, yeah, I hear you.
possible. But you put your face close to their face.
Mhm.
That's what feels like the really intimate thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you put your arms around them and you hold their hand. And it's just a complete oxytocin bomb.
Mhm.
And I think people are, I don't know if they're literally high on that. So my friend Janice Wang, who's a neuroscientist, has done some observational studies. So they're of limited kind
Sure.
of scientific like
Sure.
clout. But her observational studies suggest that there's a lot of hormonal um, difference, hormonal changes that happen when people are dancing tango.
Intuitively, that makes sense, so, yeah.
All of them kind of beneficial, like um, adrenaline goes down and stress hormones go down, testosterone goes shooting right up, oxytocin goes up,
Mhm.
serotonin goes up. You
Mhm.
feel just kind of blissed out and
Mhm.
relaxed and happy.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like doing MDMA without the drugs, so
yes, I think it
it's
probably
super
is.
blissful, euphoric, yeah.
So that experience is lovely. Once you're able to have it, at the beginning, it's going to be kind of hard because just technically being able to move when you're in that position is hard at first. But once you can do it, you can't understand how it was ever difficult.
Mm.
I mean,
Mhm.
that aspect of it, you're like, how is this ever difficult? It's just so intuitive.
Mhm.
Um, then there's also this, it's also the kind of sweet spot of complexity, I would say, for engendering a Csikszentmihalyi flow state.
Mm.
Because it's um, it's not so difficult that you have to train from an early age and you have to be a professional dancer
Mm.
as you do in ballet.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I did ballet lessons for uh, but I will never be able to dance, but I will never be a ballet dancer. Ballet is a badass dance. And it's like, you
Mhm.
want to dance me, fuck you.
Right.
Um, and um, but it's also um, it's got enough technical difficulty and enough sophistication that there's a real satisfying challenge to it.
Mm.
Um, so it's the most difficult of the kind of partner dances, but it is still a folk dance. It's a urban
Mhm.
folk dance. It's a popular dance. You don't have to be a dancer. You don't have to be in great shape. Lots of the older dancers are fat and are chain smoking, obese alcoholics. Um, the dance doesn't demand a huge amount of cardiovascular fitness, doesn't demand a huge amount of flexibility. You don't have to bring your leg right up to here or anything. Um, there's skill, but it's a learnable skill. So that's very satisfying. And then also, I think the music is. It is. It is. It isn't classical music.
Hmm.
It's a bit more predictable than that because dancers require a certain level of predictability.
Hmm.
Um, but it's not. It doesn't have the repetitive quality like a set rhythm that repeats again and again or something
Hmm.
that most dance music has.
Right.
If people actually are interested in more in-depth discussion of the music, I had a very long conversation with um, Sridhar Bhagavatula, who's a professional musician, on his podcast,
Nice.
Impolite to Listen, which is a podcast on music appreciation. I
Nice.
highly recommend.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Nice.
so there's, I think those are probably the main aspects that give it that very strong draw.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because just as I'm listening to it, you started by saying how there were things that were problematic of why you don't do it anymore, how you fell out of love with it, and then you went and said all the wonderful things about it, which is super fascinating. It's still in there. You still love
Oh,
it.
yes, I do. But so I fell out of love with a kind of the sort of um, high chasing lifestyle that
Mm,
I had. And there are a couple of reasons. One is that I don't consider tango to be particularly ageist. Um, I think it's less ageist than society at large.
mhm,
Um, but nevertheless, there definitely is. Um, you hold people very close and intimately like this in tango. And of course, people do dance with all kinds of people. And you also see family members dancing together, as I'm sure you have know.
mhm,
Um, there are also a couple of brother and sister professional dance couples.
mhm,
And also, you will see older and younger people dancing with each other. But for women in particular, the older you get, the fewer people want to dance with you.
mm,
Um, and so, I mean, I had the kind of apex of my dancing experience was when I was still a relative beginner at the dance, but I was young enough to be kind of hot, to be sexy. Um, and now I'm now I'm in my 50s, and I really if I go to Milonga in Buenos Aires, I will sit a lot.
mm.
And I find that experience very frustrating.
Yeah, sure.
So that's one of the things. The other is that it's um, if you don't have the best back,
Mm,
if you don't have the best spinal health, in tango you do this thing called dissociation, which is a repetitive twisting motion,
mm,
which is not in itself terrible, but you're doing it probably 500 times an hour.
mm. Yeah.
And it's twisting the lower back all the way down to the lumbar vertebrae.
Mhm.
And if you know anything about spinal health at all, you will know that you're always told the lumbar vertebrae shouldn't twist.
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to do
um,
that, especially as you get
yeah.
older. You definitely don't want to do that. You'll feel it.
So I definitely have, and you do that in high heels if you're a woman also. Um, so I definitely I'm beginning to now feel it if I dance a lot of hours,
Mm,
and I don't want that to worsen. And also, I think that um, although it was such an amazing experience, it kind of cut out other experiences. For example, I could only live in Buenos Aires,
mhm,
and
mhm,
I really it was my only hobby. I also read, but because there was no space for anything else in my life, and I feel as though there are other things I want to explore.
mm, yeah.
Um, and I guess those are the two main things. And then the other thing that happened was when I became an Argentine citizen, my Pakistani citizenship was automatically rescinded because they do not allow dual citizenship.
Mhm,
Um, and as a result, I was suddenly able to go to India. So I
mm.
almost immediately went to India. And I was in India in total for 2 years,
Wow.
with a couple of months here and there back. I spent 2 sets of 2 months away from India, but I was basically there for 2 years. and a little time in Sri Lanka, but basically 2 years in India. And I went there it was kind of a midlife crisis, I guess. I went there to reconnect with my Indian side of my heritage. And it was a very intense experience for me.
Mm,
Um, so much so that I couldn't teach tango, and I taught tango in India actually, but I couldn't teach tango for a living in India
mhm,
and do my tango things. So I had to change up what I was doing.
mm,
And I also just reignited my passion for reading and writing. And I adored being in India, and I decided I wanted to make being in India
mm,
a major aspect of my life, to go every year for an extended period,
mm.
which of course hasn't happened this year,
Right,
but
yeah, yeah.
is still the plan.
Mm.
So those
Where
are the
where
reasons
in
that I kind of
where in India did you go? To
I
Bombay?
went Bombay, yes.
Bombay, yeah. And because that's the where your paternal, family is and all, or well, that's where, you said your dad was from,
Um,
but is there family
my
there that
dad
you have?
was No,
No?
I haven't been able to locate any family of
Mm,
mine. Um, um, there's only there's a guy called Zubin Madin who I confusingly always refer to as my cousin, but it's kind of a joke that all Parsis are related, so Zubin and I are cousins, but actually we're just friends. He's not my cousin at all. But I can't let go of calling him my cousin because I don't have any real cousins. I'm like,
Mm.
cousin Zubin. Yeah, he's my sentimental cousin of the
Mm,
heart.
mhm,
Um, no, I didn't know anyone at all in India, and social media was a real godsend in this regard.
mm,
So first of all, I was on Facebook posting about how I wanted to go to India and find out about my Parsi heritage, and I came across by chance I came across Zubin, who is a Indian Parsi, lives in Bombay,
mm.
and um, he introduced me to a Parsi family, mother and son, who he said that who offered to let me stay with them in Bombay. So
Oh,
that was the original plan. I was going to stay with them. So I
that's
thought, I don't
that's
really
nice,
have
yeah.
to work out too many things. I'll just get the visa, my flight, pack up my flat, and get ready to go. Um, so I got initially my 1 year visa and all my stuff together.
Mhm.
And then I arrived in the airport in I arrived in the airport at 3 a.m., very disoriented and tremendously jet lagged. I think there's about 14 hours difference from Argentina
I
or
was gonna say
something
that's a
crazy.
terribly long flight, and then the time change from Argentina to India is tremendous. Oh my goodness.
It's almost all the way around the world. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
four-fifths of the way around.
Yeah.
And I was met by the mother and son, and there was immediately, as soon as the mother saw me, her eyes narrowed. And the son was about my age and he was very handsome. So I don't know what the objection was,
Mhm,
but my best guess is she imagined I was either much younger or maybe much older. I think she
mhm.
imagined I was older. So she thought I would be like an old granny who would not be any threat. And she felt I was young enough, very flatteringly, she felt I was young enough to be a kind of threat,
Mhm.
um, to sort of seduce her son or something. That's my best guess. But
Oh,
anyway, we were driving around Bombay, and they were kind of chatting to each other in the back of the Uber, um, in Gujarati, which I barely speak,
mhm.
so I couldn't really understand anything. Um, and then they decided that I couldn't stay with them after all, and they deposited me at a hostel, this Dharamsala,
Oh my.
which was I later discovered it was in Charney Road, which is the most one of the craziest. I thought all Bombay was like this when I arrived. And Bombay is very in your face.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's like being in India generally is like turning the volume knob up on life. Every sensation is tuned up to maximum. So, the smells are very intense, the good smells and the terrible smells.
Mhm.
It's incredibly loud. It's incredibly busy. It's very colorful in a literal sense, like people are dressed in the brightest of colors.
Mm-hmm.
It's all true. The kind of hot pink is the navy blue of India. Um, and also, every block is a little microcosm of the world.
Wow.
Here's a temple, there's an agyari, there's a mosque, and there's the guy doing his tailoring thing, and there's somebody else, some sadhu who is praying and meditating, and there are people milking cows, and this is in the middle of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a lot of stimulus.
Yes, but Charney Road is like that on steroids. It's one of the most kind of like busiest and craziest places. And so I was staying there, and it was the most austere and monastic place I've ever stayed.
Wow.
The Dharamsala was really, it was really austere. It was basically a mattress there was a sheet on top. There was no bedding, which I definitely didn't need bedding. It was hotter than hell in there.
Yeah.
And it was this bake roasting room. And out in the street, it was so noisy that I couldn't make a telephone call in my room with the window closed.
Oh my goodness.
Because I couldn't hear. It was too noisy. And so I went to stay there. And I really had very bad culture shock in the first few weeks. And I thought maybe I've made a terrible mistake. And Zubin was away, and I didn't, for various reasons, I wasn't able to even meet Zubin until much later. And social media was a godsend, basically. So first of all, I went on Twitter, and I tweeted about being there. And I think at that time I had around 3,000 or 4,000 Twitter followers. So it wasn't huge, but it was enough to find people. And through people on Twitter, I met other people, and I made friends with some Parsis. And then I also went on Facebook, and I was posting about it. And it's amazing. So I had to leave. There was a point at which I had to leave the Dharamsala. And I had nowhere to stay, and it's really hard to find places to live in Bombay. Actually, it's very difficult unless you go way outside the city and are willing to live hours away. And I really didn't want to give up on being in the historic south part of Bombay, which is the Parsi neighborhood. So I hadn't been able to find anywhere to stay. And on Facebook, someone else who dances tango, who I had never met, an Indian lady called Babita, who I had never met, who had just heard from somebody else who knew her, told me that she knew a guy in Pune, and his name was Alex. He was an Indian guy, but his name was Alexandre. He was brought up in French-speaking Tamil Nadu, and I could stay with him. He would let me stay with him for 3 months at his place in Pune, rent-free.
Wow.
And I never met this guy. Of course, he could have been an axe murderer, but it seemed very unlikely. I trusted the Tango network, and I trusted the person who'd recommended Babita to me, and therefore I trusted the person Babita had recommended. So I'm missing out a couple of things. One thing is there ended up being I had to leave the Dharamsala 2 weeks before, a week and a half before I was able to go to Pune. So I again had this tiny bit of time, and I didn't have money to go to a hotel, and you can't really rent a flat for that shorter period. And that's what they didn't have Airbnb really established in India. And I went on Twitter and I tweeted about it. And this woman on Twitter, who was just an anonymous follower of mine who I'd never even interacted with, and she wrote and she said, well, I want to meet you first, so let's have lunch. But if we get on well over lunch, then you can come and stay with me and my sister for the 10 days.
It's
And
so incredible.
she came down, we had lunch together. Um, and then I went up and I stayed with her and her sister. They treated me like royalty. She vacated her bedroom and
Wow.
shared a bed with her sister so I could
Oh
have my
my.
own bedroom while I was there. They
Wow.
cooked for me. They wouldn't let me lift a finger. It was incredible. And they were not wealthy.
Mm,
They were not dirt poor, but they were not wealthy. This
sure.
was not
Yeah.
a luxurious setup,
Yeah.
but incredible. And then I got an Uber and I just went across to Pune and turned up in the late evening at Alex's door. And he welcomed me in, and we ate late night dal and rice and dal. And then I
Mhm.
lived with him for nearly 4 months.
Mm,
So it was I went to India knowing nobody at all.
mhm,
And even the two people I knew and was supposed to stay with, that fell through immediately.
mhm,
And I just, through social media, I really quickly met people. And then, of course, I met the people they knew. And by the time I left, I've never had a warmer, I've never had a warmer sensation of being in the bosom of kind of friend circle than
mhm.
I had in India. It was just incredible.
Did do you and how long did you live there in total in India at the time?
2 years in total.
2 years total. How did I'm curious, as you've been kind of chronicling all of your different experiences in literally different parts of the world, which is super cool, is I'm wondering how do people maybe I should ask this backwards, but or I am asking this backwards, but how do people typically receive you in terms
I mm,
of they obviously they see you as a woman, but like you got a lot of different parts to you, and so you know since we're on India, let's stay there for a minute. Obviously, you have that as part of your uh, family history and your some aspect of your identity, but how do they how did folks in India over the 2 years you were there, how did they receive you? Were you kind of this kind of mixed person? Or was this like, oh yeah, you're one of us, or was it you're from the you're you're from the master land that what how, how did people kind of receive you? I guess in India.
yeah. I should say also that I have lived in the US and in for a short time in Sri Lanka and also in Germany. So
Yes, great. Where in the
I lived
U.S.?
in other places too.
Oh,
I lived in Los Angeles and
okay.
also and later in St. Paul.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay.
Um, but
Um,
yeah, to the Indian question.
yeah.
So um, I think that mostly when I was walking down the street, people perceived me as a foreigner,
Hmm.
but which might have been a problem if I were younger.
Hmm.
So I think if you're a young woman foreigner in India, especially in Delhi, much less so in Bombay, but especially in Delhi, you would get a lot of harassment and stuff. But when you're 50, you're just invisible. Not just in India, but in India also. I'm a sexless being at this age in the general among the general population, um,
so,
which
so,
is a great relief in many ways. It
well, yeah.
brings enormous
As
freedoms.
so sad as that is,
Um,
yeah, that's yeah. But I think that so it sounds like the age thing was more, I guess, I don't say relevant, but I guess more salient for you in terms of how you were
um,
perceived or perceived potentially.
no, no, I don't think so. Sorry, I'm answering all your questions in an extremely long-winded way.
No, it's okay.
Uh, but I guess that's a good quality in a podcast guest, right?
I hope so.
um,
I think so.
but so I think most people walking down the street perceived me as a Westerner, but there
Mhm.
were a few occasions on which it was really clear that I was perceived as an Indian.
Mm,
And one occasion in particular, which I'm not going to go into in detail, but especially after I had been in Sri Lanka, I
mhm,
returned to India and I was very tanned.
mhm,
And I have a quite like, I don't know, yellow undertoned skin. I look really quite Indian when I'm actually tanned, rather than looking like a white person with a tan. I
Mhm.
have this kind of like yellowy, walnutty look,
Mhm.
um, and um, which just looks more like a natural skin color, even though it's not. I'm just actually tanned. But I arrived back and I think because I was tanned, and I always wore I almost always wore kurta churidar when I was in India, and occasionally saris.
Mhm.
Um, there was a period at which took me for Indian, and they were clearly surprised that I didn't speak Marathi and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But mostly, I think the usual perception was this is a Western person, and I did think that I wasn't sure whether ordinary Indians, and in particular Parsis, would accept me. Now, Parsi, let me talk about the ordinary Indians first, I guess. Ordinary, quote unquote, non-Parsi Indians.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I um, so I think it helps a lot that Indians really themselves span a wide range of skin colors, and although it's not usual, I had more than one Indian friend who had a very white person skin color, like pale pinkish
Yeah.
skin. Salman Rushdie being a kind of famous example of someone
Mhm.
who
Sure.
looks like that,
Yeah.
um, but and who is fully Indian.
Mhm.
So I think that helped because people are constantly telling me. As soon as I told them I was half Indian, they were like, "I knew it. You look so Indian," which was always clearly projection on their part. um, but there was kind of an immediate willingness to accept. That's what I felt. Um, and there was an immediate sort of, on the part of the friends that I made, there was an immediate willingness to say, yes, you are one of us.
Mm.
And people, strangers, loved it when I told them my father was Indian.
Mm.
They're just like, so you're one of us then. You are Indian then. Um, so it was, I found it very inclusive in that way. Um, Even though it was really odd because I felt very much like a foreigner. I've spent almost all my life in the West, and I don't speak any Indian languages. I used to speak Gujarati as a child, and it's pretty much completely forgotten. I can only do little fragments and stuff, and occasionally recognize individual words. It's like almost gone. Um, Even though I didn't speak the language and I was often kind of doing things wrong and not knowing like what the thing was and not
Mm.
being familiar with just ways of doing stuff.
Mhm.
Like I was really terrified by riding on the back of a moped, for example, doing that kamikaze style of driving that Indians do. That was just
Yeah.
intense for me. Um, but um, Nevertheless, I also felt amazingly at home. And I don't know how much of this was imagination. I
Mm.
think maybe much of it was imagination because I do think identities are kind of the pack of cards of identities that your birth identities that you have
Yeah.
um, are there for you to, they're easily available, socially available to you in a way that they wouldn't be if you didn't have that official like stamp of approval,
Mhm.
um, of having been born in the right place, having the right parentage or whatever.
Right.
But you can kind of choose to lean into them or not.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I really, really lent into it
Mhm.
as much as I possibly could. And I felt as though everything felt, um, the sensory stuff felt extremely familiar. And I don't know if this is my imagination, but I felt as though um, the smells, the tastes, the kind of feel of the air on your skin, certain sounds, um, like for example, the experience of being woken by crows, which is a very Indian thing.
Mhm.
Um, You don't need an alarm clock because as soon as it's light, all the crows in your windowsill are going like crazy. Um, all of those experiences just seemed to me like little bits of it was like I was walking over a landscape. I was walking over a field of landmines, and um, as I trod on each landmine, I was just showered with memory shrapnel.
Mm.
Um, there was a very strong kind of sensual nostalgia I had, and it felt right to me. Like I if it hadn't been for my Indian friends often wanting to eat non-Indian food, I would not have eaten any non-Indian food. Um, and I did not want to wear Western clothes. And in fact, it took me about a year after returning before I wore Western clothes again.
Mm.
I was just like, I just doesn't feel right to put on Western clothes. I just don't want to.
Interesting.
It was really weird.
Yeah.
I don't want to wear a t-shirt. It just feels really wrong. Um, and I just everything about the aesthetic seemed to like go straight to straight to the core of my being. I loved everything about that kind of the art, the color, the food, the music. I had a really strong sense of belonging in that way. And then the Parsi thing. So Parsi Parsi identity is um, trying to think of the best way to put it. It is it's fortress Parsi. Um, you are a Parsi if your father was Parsi. It's patrilineal and full stop.
Hmm.
Um,
But mom
you
has nothing to do with it.
your mother has nothing to do with it. There are some very strict people who insist that both parents must be Parsi.
Mm.
And I just kind of avoided those people. They didn't want to get into trouble. But the majority opinion was what's important is the father.
Mm.
Um, and if your father is Parsi and if you've had your Naujat initiation into the Zoroastrian religion, which I also have had,
Mhm.
which I had in Pakistan, and I actually kind of redid it because I didn't remember it and I wanted to have the experience. And there's nothing that says you can't have your Naujat twice. So I had a second Naujat in upstate New York before I went to India. And that is it. So if you've married a Parsi, you're not Parsi.
It's a
If
bloodline
your
thing.
Yeah, if your mother was Parsi, your father was not, you're not Parsi.
Mm.
If you're an adopted child of Parsi parents, you're not Parsi.
Oh.
Um, it's absolutely merciless.
Mm.
I think it's really inhumane, actually, that aspect of it. The
Mm.
religion does not accept converts.
Mm.
Um, there are some exceptions made for Iranians who might be ancestral, quote unquote,
Yeah.
Zoroastrians.
Yeah.
But other than that, no. But so I was really concerned that people would not accept me.
Mhm.
And I would say that there was a 90% acceptance.
Mm.
So I um, I lived in the Parsi Bagh, this gated Parsi community, and I lived in the most prestigious and nicest of the Parsi gated communities, Kushru Bagh down in South Bombay. Um, I went to all of the Agyaris and Atash Behrams, and I did the Parsi Yatra. I did a pilgrimage
Mm.
thing. Um, and there were definitely some people who were not happy about my kind of some conservative people who were not happy about that.
Mhm.
So it was always a little bit fraught, but the majority of people were fine with it and they were very accepting. And I mostly, um, mostly got the response that I was definitely Parsi and that was it.
Mhm.
There was, no question.
And just for listeners, because I'm sure some listeners may not be aware of I guess it's an ethnicity, right? Parsi is an ethnicity. Um, how
Yes.
old is this group of individuals or group of people? It's very old, you know.
Yes. So the Parsis reputedly, this is legend. It's not history, but reputedly came to India in around 800 AD,
Mhm.
when Iran was Islamized
Mhm.
by force. Um, Actually, archaeological sites suggest that we were there earlier. It's very easy to detect our presence because of our um, unique system of burials. The
Mhm.
sky burials, the famous Zoroastrian thing that
Mhm.
after death your body is placed in the Tower of Silence to be eaten by vultures,
Mhm.
which I actually think is an incredibly beautiful ritual. I love it.
Mhm.
But so they're towers of silence that predate the 8th century on
Wow.
the Gujarat coast. So we probably arrived even before. Or maybe there were small trading outposts and entrepôts and stuff. So the legend goes that a small group of Zoroastrians sailed across the sea. On the way, they got kind of blown off course, and some of them lost a month in the process. And as a result, there are several competing Zoroastrian calendars, and our calendar is totally fucked. It's a 12-month calendar of every month is 30 days. And then every 120 years, there is a leap month. It's a completely fucked system,
That's
but
so
never mind.
strange.
So our new year is now mid-August. But anyway, they arrived on the Gujarat coast, and the story, which is a really beautiful integration story, goes that the head Mobed, the Parsi head priest, asked the local ruler in Gujarat, if they could stay. And the ruler said, India is already full, little did he know. There's no room for you. And he called for a big clay jug full of milk, filled to the top with milk. And he said, my lands are like this clay jug full of milk. Nothing more will fit. And allegedly, of course, this is legendly, the priest called for jaggery, like a sugar, and he dissolved a couple of tablespoons of the sugar in the milk and stirred it in. And he said, we will be like sugar in your milk. We will live among you, and we promise to speak your language, wear the clothes that you wear, follow your customs, and have our weddings after dark, as Hindus have their weddings after sundown, as long as we can practice our religion. So, as a result, Parsis all speak Gujarati. The official kind of Parsi language is Gujarati, Parsi Gujarati, which is a bit different from the kind spoken by ordinary Gujaratis. It's like a little dialect version.
Sure.
Because, as so often with these kinds of promises, instead of taking it in the spirit of the thing, i.e., we'll speak whatever language the locals speak, it was taken literally. We will speak Gujarati from now on to the end of time, even if we live in wherever it is far from Gujarat. So that's the story. And to put that in perspective, human beings didn't reach New Zealand until 1000 AD. So Parsis were in India 200 years before the Maori were in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, my understanding of it, my history of civilization is okay. It's always can be better. But if I remember correctly, Parsis are Persian. Is this correct?
Yes. So historically, so it's thought that Zoroaster lived around the time of the characters in the Iliad. So earlier than Homer, but
that's wild.
At the time of the kind of events of the Iliad. I mean, who knows? But it is said. And probably somewhere in current day Russia, or northern Iran, somewhere in that kind of region. And so Zoroastrianism, the religion, is very old, and you can kind of tell there are lots of sort of pantheistic elements, and it's very much an outdoorsy religion. It's no longer done outdoors, but a lot of ceremonies involve making a fire and having a fire. And it's actually quite the jashan, which is this house traditional blessing ceremony that you have in Persian New Year, which is not the same as our New Year, but the Persian New Year, first day of spring,
Hmm.
is it's a wonderful ceremony. I'm really happy to have experienced it. It's also quite hard because you'll be doing it in some small Bombay flat, which is filling with smoke. And you're standing watching the ceremony, and your throat starts to really hurt after a while.
Mm.
Clearly, this was meant to be on some Mount Persian hilltop,
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
out in the wind.
Yeah.
And there are lots of traditions involve animals. Famously, dogs are sacred to Zoroastrianism,
Hmm.
which seems very sensible to me. Dogs would be sacred to me anyway, even if I were not Zoroastrian. Um, and the only time Parsis have ever rioted was during the Raj, when the British decided to cull stray dogs from the Bombay streets
Wow.
and started
Wow.
shooting stray dogs. Parsis rioted.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. Yeah, they definitely love their dogs. Then I mean, that's something. There's a value system that goes centuries. I mean, that's yeah, that's huge.
yeah, so that's probably more information than you
No, no, no,
needed.
no, 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 no. It's great. I'm putting together in my kind of kaleidoscope, if you will. There's this identity of being in India, generally modern day India, and then you have this connection with, through the paternal bloodline of being Parsi, but then Scottish or British. How are we talking
Um,
about this?
hmm, yeah, so I definitely, well, both Scottish and British, definitely not English. I'm not English in any
Can you
way, shape,
can
or
you can
form.
you educate me on this? So I have a few I have a few members across the pond, family members across the pond, and a couple of friends, and so, but I don't think I've ever had this explained probably in a good way. So I know it's sort of complicated, and I guess there's a bunch of histories and then modern stuff. But how do you understand it?
Well, uh, yeah, there's a history. I mean, Scotland and England entered into a union in 1707
Hmm.
after a vote by the Scottish Parliament. Um, for mutual enrichment. So it's completely different to the history of Ireland. Ireland was a colony, exploited. With Scotland, it was a partnership, um, which is why, for example, put it in really crass terms, during the potato famine, the Scottish were also very reliant on potatoes, but because we were kind of an equal member of a partnership, we were helped out,
Hmm.
and not relatively few Scottish people died, whereas the Irish, one third died, one third went to the US. I mean, only a third of the population was left at
Right.
the end of the famine. Um,
And this is before their split between the
North and
Northern Ireland
South.
and Republic of Ireland or whatever. So
Yes,
it's so
yes,
yeah,
that's
it's
very recent.
yeah.
Um, so, on a personal level, the problem is my childhood was very bitty. And this was an issue for me for a long time. I felt not so much that I had so many identities as that I had no proper identity at all. I
How
felt
do,
that
how do you mean?
I felt that whatever identity I claimed would be inauthentic.
Mm,
So if I said I was Indian, that didn't make sense because I no longer lived in India and I didn't have any Indian relatives around, and
mhm,
um, uh, I wasn't following any Indian traditions or anything like that, and I didn't look Indian.
mm,
Um, and but then again, if I said I was Scottish, I had actually, I really haven't lived that much time in Scotland because after my parents died, and I came here, I went to live with my older sister.
mhm.
Um, my older half sister on my mother's side, she is very Scottish, and but I was mostly at boarding school. I think there was only 8 weeks or 10 weeks or something of the year that I was in vacation
Mhm.
from school. So, and only in some of those occasions. Sorry, no, that's completely wrong. It's more weeks than that. I think it's like 8 plus. Um, I think it's actually 8 plus 12
Mm,
weeks, so it's actually 20 weeks. Um, but in smallish chunks, four
mhm.
weeks here, 4 weeks there,
Sure.
and only in some of those times was I in Scotland. So I didn't really feel that I sort of grew up in Scotland in that sense.
Mm.
I didn't have a room somewhere in Scotland where I had my posters on the wall and my things in the wardrobe.
Sure.
I was living out of a suitcase. And um, but I do feel, I guess, um, I have a large family on my mother's side, Scottish family, and they're really wonderful people. But I don't feel terribly close to them because I really didn't see that much of them when I was growing up.
Hmm.
Um, and that's sort of a shame because they're marvelous, but they all know each other extremely close, intimately.
Mm.
Um, Most of them live in the same town or close to
Wow.
the town.
Wow.
Um, and my sister has this very intense relationship. For her, family is everything.
Mm.
Um, and she also moved back to be down in the town where the family is
Hmm.
because she wanted to be closer to them. Um, but So I feel a little bit semi-detached from the family because I spent relatively little time with them growing up.
Mm.
Um, and for a long time, Cambridge was really the place that I had spent the most time. So I went as an undergraduate in 1988, and I did my undergraduate degree. I did a gap year, and then I did my PhD. And I was very slow doing my PhD. I took nearly 5 years, which in the UK is ultra slow. I know in the US
So
it's
about
normal,
standard
but
here in the United States.
yeah, for us for us that's very, very tardy.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
I took like 4.5 years. So I ended up being in Cambridge for more or less 8 years. And
Is that more time than you spent in Scotland cumulatively?
oh yes,
Huh.
yes,
So
definitely.
so is this where the British thing comes in?
Yes, so I'm very, very attached to Cambridge. It was actually, I mean, my time at Cambridge felt absolutely idyllic.
Mm.
When I was at boarding school, I wasn't bullied at boarding school because I was just so indifferent to genuinely indifferent to the opinions of the other girls because
Mm.
we shared so little in common in terms of interests and values
Mm.
with most of them.
Mm.
Um, there were there was one exception. There's one really lovely girl who, to me, really lovely girl who now lives in Canada. We're still in touch.
Mm.
Um, Julie, if you are listening, hello. um, and I was I was I was so unimpressed. I was such a kind of intellectual snob as a child. I was so unimpressed by the other girls that I couldn't be bullied.
Mm.
They were like, "You're ugly and you will never have a boyfriend." I'm like, "So what? I don't want a boyfriend. I want to be a blue stocking and become a professor at Cambridge." Um, you know,
Your insults can't hurt me. They
exactly.
don't register for my goals in life, so they can't hurt me.
Exactly. It's weird because I'm not a very stoic person. I'm very easily offended and hurt,
Uh,
but for some reason, I was so disconnected from them.
mm.
And I was an extreme introvert as a child. I
Mm.
mean, people did think there was something wrong with me. I
Mm.
had therapy,
Mm.
um, and I learned to sit in the therapist's chair in complete silence for a full hour,
Mm.
which I know that must be really hard for you to imagine now. You're like, where is that
No.
woman? Bring her back.
No, no. I mean, it's so fascinating how we evolve and progress and different experiences. I don't think we change as people per se, but we definitely can evolve in ways that we present and behave and act in ways, very dissimilar to how we were when we were younger.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I mean, some people thought that I had autism
mm.
because I was just so antisocial.
Mm.
Um, I just wanted to go on long walks on my own and
Mhm.
read.
Mhm.
And I would also just sit daydreaming for hours.
Mm.
Um, and so I was a real loner at school and I hated the school with every fiber of my being. It was one of those old fashioned boarding schools of the kind which I think W.H. Auden described it best when he said, his school. Actually, was it Auden who said this? Well, one of those 30s
Mhm.
writers described his school as a cross between prison and the army.
Oh my gosh.
Um, and I think he also said that he was against totalitarianism because he had experienced a totalitarian
Mhm.
state at boarding school. I felt very, very similarly about my school. I absolutely loathed it.
Did you
And
guys have a, what do you guys call it? A headmaster, a school? What do you call it? Schoolmaster? What do they
we
call it?
had
What's
a
the term?
headmistress, yes, and
Headmistress.
we had
Excuse me.
house mistresses also,
Okay.
and prefects.
Were
I
they
was
tyrannical with you guys, or no?
Yes, it was Lord of the Flies. I mean, not quite that bad, but when I read Lord of the Flies, I really recognized the situation. It's like, don't give slightly older children huge amounts of power, unsupervised power over younger children. This is really a bad idea. Um, it was
That's funny.
Lord of the Flies was the resonated with me a lot, having been to that school.
I can imagine so.
But I was relatively unaffected. I mean, I just withdrew. Um, I
So,
wasn't popular and I didn't care.
and
Um,
so right. So then getting to Cambridge must have felt,
oh my God.
I guess,
Yeah,
at
it was
home,
so
or
liberating.
yeah, like it just kind of, I guess, felt familiar. It just felt like this is where I was supposed to be in this kind of setting, this kind of environment. You finally got to where you, I don't say it like in an arrogant way, but like that you got to where you should have been, because that's just kind of your temperament, I guess.
Well, I wanted to go to Cambridge since I was about 8.
Mm,
And well, I not only wanted to go, but I kind of knew I would go because
mhm,
I was very gifted academically. There was no question that I wouldn't make the grades.
mhm,
Although later, John Mullen, who later became my PhD supervisor,
mhm.
um, told me that I almost didn't get in because I came across as such a weirdo at the interview. And in fact, the others didn't were iffy about me, and he said, she's just typical boarding school brat. Give her a chance. Um, so I arrived, and it was like um, all of the kind of misfit, nerdy, intellectual people who'd all been um, fish out of water in their respective environments. Not all of them. There were some who came from really academically driven schools where 20 of them in their cohort had all gone to Cambridge. But most of us had come from environments where we felt out of place.
Mm,
And suddenly we're in this kind of intellectual wonderland.
mhm.
Um, and we had huge freedom. There was a structure to the curriculum in English literature.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say,
I'm
sorry,
giving you
you're,
again an incredibly long answer. I'm
no, no,
sorry.
no, no, it's okay. No, I like long answers. You got a, again, I'm not familiar with the British system, but you get a bachelor's. Is it a 4-year college?
Yes.
What's it called? A
Yes.
bachelor's? Yeah.
BA, yes.
BA in literature,
Um,
English literature,
English literature, yes.
and the same for the PhD was also in English literature, or no?
Yes, it was, yes.
Okay. Do you guys get a master's? How does that?
Oh, we get this silly automatic masters.
Okay, so it's sort of kind of how it is
It's
here
like
too.
an honorary master's. So if someone has an MA,
Mhm.
that just means they really have only got a bachelor's, an undergraduate degree.
Mm.
If you've done an actual master's where you had to be there for a year or 2 years and produce a thesis, etc.,
Mhm,
then it's
mhm.
called an MPhil. It's an MPhil that you have.
Okay, okay, gotcha. Okay.
I have an MA, but it doesn't mean anything. So actually, I usually just put BA unless I'm, applying for a job or something.
Yeah,
Because if I say MA, it makes it sound like I did some work in between. I didn't. You just get awarded it.
that's
But
sort of kind of how some, or many now, PhD programs work in the States too, where you basically, your first 2 years is your coursework, and they just say you meet enough requirements for a master's, and and then you do the last 2 to 3 years for your PhD. So it technically counts as a master's here, but it it's not honorary. It is an actual master's, but it is a kind of like, yeah, you got that in process of getting your PhD. It's a strange. It sounds sort of similar, but I actually like that MPhil kind of idea. It's a nice idea.
yeah, do you want me to tell you a little bit more about the Cambridge kind of setup? Um,
Sure,
or
sure, yeah.
I'm sorry, I have this John Muir thing where he says, if you get hold of one single thing, you'll find it attached to the entire universe. I can't
Great.
remember what the exact quotation is. But anyway, it's so you have a basic structure. You study English literature from Beowulf to the present day. Um,
Wow.
and each semester is dedicated to a particular period. I'm
Mm,
simplifying a little bit, but basically, so you do it in chronological order, of course.
mhm,
And so, say it's the 18th century, which was my period
mm,
term, then you have to do you have to choose 8 topics, 8 writers, or groups of writers, and you have to have um, roughly equal amounts of poetry, prose, and drama.
mm.
And then after that, it's up to you.
Oh,
You, the student, choose whatever you want to write your essay on. You write your essay each week. And then when you go into your what we call supervision, which is these very small tutorial style classes with a
mm,
professor 2-on-1,
mm.
um, the professor will take your essay apart and you have to defend what you wrote. Um, so that's how our system was mostly structured.
Mhm,
And we did have some kind of seminar work.
mhm,
Um, and the lectures were people would lecture in the English department on whatever book they happened to be writing at the time, whatever thing they were into at that moment and were
mhm,
researching.
mhm,
And I treated the lectures completely as entertainment. I went to hear particular lecturers who I knew were um, who I liked. When Christopher Ricks was lecturing, I went to his lectures on Boccaccio's Decameron, and I also went to his lectures on Dante, which I hadn't even read. I just
mm,
went to the lectures,
mm,
and also on Milton and on Bob Dylan's lyrics. And I didn't study or write about any of those people during
mm,
my degree, but I just wanted to hear what
mm,
Christopher had to say.
mm,
And I feel that most of the learning, therefore, went on in discussions,
mhm,
and just um, and you also at Cambridge, you're grouped by college, not by subject, and the idea is that your friends should be from different subjects, so you
mhm,
get a broad range. And I had that. So my best friends were doing um, natural sciences, and maths, and music. Um, and history, and we would all get together and we would drink too much and smoke pot and stay up all night and be discussing stuff.
mhm,
It was just like a kind of intellectual paradise.
mm,
And also back in the day, it was free.
mm.
There was no tuition.
So
And
that's not a concept I understand here in the States.
And yeah, and we were given grants for our living expenses. And I also had a scholarship because I performed particularly well in my entrance exams. Um, so, um, yeah, it was. So that was an incredible experience. Sorry, I
No, no, no,
dragged this out way too long. So for a long
that's
time, I just felt like Cambridge is my home, and
yeah,
I
yeah, I can imagine so. I mean, well, just kind of the setup of it, but then also just for you specifically, and then yeah, we have something similar here in terms of a very, 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 very dumbed down version of that. But we have St. John's College. I don't know if you're familiar. Which is
no.
there's one here in Annapolis in Maryland, and then they have a campus in I think it's in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they have a sort of type of version of that. So again, it's not fully like that, but it's very small. And they basically what they do is each semester you get it's a master's degree, uh, terminal master's, and basically it's a liberal arts degree, and you basically read all of the classics, but you read in different fields, right? So you do, Euclid in terms of math, and you'll do literature, and then you'll do some of the theology, and you'll do maybe one of the other physical sciences, and then and then you write a thesis, and the classes are designed as a type of forum where it's just
Mm,
discussion
mm.
based, and it's a really nice structure on how they do that, and so I had
That
a
sounds
friend.
lovely.
It's very
We
nice. I had a friend
yeah,
that went there, and I've known other people kind of in a tertiary way that have gone there, and it's really, really, really nice. And it's the same thing. It's you just write papers and you discuss it, you talk about it, and it's very, very nice. It's yeah.
I think 2 key things, which I'll try and be very brief about, but
Go ahead.
one was that parallel to all the, literature study, we had, um, every other week, we had a seminar group which was called Practical Criticism,
Hmm.
which was, close reading, excerpts of prose or poetry, often that we hadn't seen before without knowing who had written it necessarily,
Hmm.
and doing these very close analyses of the language and the meaning of the text itself,
Hmm.
trying to pull in nothing from outside, but just
Hmm.
focusing in on the text,
It's
which
kind
was
of
enormously fun.
it's like this
Um,
exegesis of sorts, right? You're trying to get from the text itself. Yeah.
yes, yes. And then when we had exams, our exams would be the questions on the exam would be framed in a very general way to allow you to answer with whatever authors and texts you had happened to choose. So it
Nice.
would say something like, um, now I can't think of anything clever, but it would say some it would have some general statement about literature, say, and it would say discuss. And if it was the 18th century paper, you had to use 18th century literature to
Sure.
back up your point.
Yeah.
But um, they were like philosophical statements or famous quotations from people or
Hmm.
um, sound bites or whatever, and then it would you just discuss, use whatever material
Yeah.
is
Great.
relevant to this period.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah. Me too. It's nice.
It was just a fantastically it was just an intellectual idyll for me. And it's also Cambridge, of course, also really, really beautiful, architecturally
Hmm.
beautiful.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Um, so I gotta ask. So I don't talk about it much on here. I want to more, but so I'm a big I'll give a slight backstory to this, but I'm a big literature fan, right? In fact, I don't particularly I'll read anything, but I don't particularly like modern literature. It's fine. I mean, I'll read it. I have to really find something that will kind of impress me or wow me. It's just not my style. But I mean, I'll read the old stuff over and over and over again. I mean, I can't get enough of it. To me, those things have no bottom to them. Um, so 18th century literature, who are your who are your your I don't want to say favorite, but people that guy or girl that you go back to and you just love. They just click for you at this point.
So um, so my absolute favorite writer from that period is Samuel Johnson.
Mm,
Um, I think that he is uniquely. It's very unusual to find someone who is such a sharp-eyed satirist and so funny, quietly funny as a satirist, but who has this deeply compassionate and humane approach.
mm,
So it's not the kind of biting satire of someone like Swift. Of course, Swift is also genius, but
yeah.
it's um, the Johnson stuff is so. He was such a deeply kind and humane man. Um, and that comes across in all of his writing. I find it deeply wise and also very just beautifully and eloquently put. And his novel Restless is a wonderful book. It's not a good novel. It's a terrible novel. I mean, almost nothing happens, but it's a wonderful book. You have to see it as more like a work of philosophy.
Mm,
Um, as far as novelists go, I think that um, the ones I always return to are Tom Jones.
mhm.
If you haven't read that, you must read that.
I have not. I'm familiar loosely, but I have not read it.
So I think that its plot is a deeply underrated thing.
Mm,
Just being able to just having good storytelling skills. And I think it's possibly the hardest thing to pull off. It's much easier
Mm.
to write a very beautiful and vivid, evocative description or
Mm.
say something deeply profound and meaningful or something. But it's really hard to just put together a perfect plot. And this
Mm.
is the most perfect plot.
Mm.
Well, Samuel Johnson said it was one of the three most perfect plots in existence. The others were Ben Jonson's The Alchemist, and now I've forgotten the third. Um, but it's definitely up there in the most perfect. It's just the artistry of the way the novel is constructed. It's very self conscious, but the artistry of the way it's kind of put together
Mm.
is just extremely enjoyable. And yeah, it's very self conscious. He addresses the reader straight on and he says, now comes a description of the heroine,
Mm.
blah, blah, blah. She was beautiful, of course, like all heroines. She was like a goddess, like all heroines. And it's not a realist novel, but
Mm.
it's um, it's just yeah, it's plotted like an Agatha Christie novel, except that it's
Mm.
a novel, not Agatha Christie. You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's also got artistic merit, and it's very funny.
Mm.
Um, and then the other one that I especially love, which is the exact opposite of that novel in every way, almost every way,
Mhm.
is Samuel Richardson's Clarissa,
Oh, I've never heard of it.
which I believe is still the longest novel ever written in the English language, and
Is
it's
it?
about half as long again as War and Peace. Um, it's very long, and the length is, I'm afraid, part of it. So Richardson tried to write in real time, i.e., he wanted it to take you as long to read as it took the events to happen to the characters.
What's the name? The name of the novel again?
Samuel Richardson, it's called Clarissa, woman's name, Clarissa. Um,
I see it.
Almost nothing happens in that novel. I'm quoting Johnson again. He said, you cannot read Richardson for the plot. If you
Mm.
read him for the plot, your patience will be so fretted you will hang yourself. You must read him for the sentiment and regard the plot as merely giving rise to the sentiment. It's just it's a extraordinarily in-depth psychological exploration,
Mm.
and it's told in two sets of letters between the female protagonist and her best friend,
Mhm.
and the male protagonist and his best
Oh,
friend.
interesting. Mm.
And she is a kind saintly and he is a villain. But
Mm.
of course, as always, you're going to fall in love with a villain.
Mhm.
Everybody is always of the devil's party.
Mhm.
Um, but nevertheless, the way the psychological exploration is done is so subtle, and the writing is also gorgeous.
Mm.
So um, I
No,
don't think any novelist got so deep into his characters' heads.
I would totally read it. I'm not so my favorite is the Russians. I love Russian literature and then probably English literature after it. And so long form is my cup of tea. I'm currently doing something and it is equally I have a love-hate relationship with it. It is amazing and at the same time it's very hard to keep up with it even for me and I do read so much. I have never read Proust in Search of a Lost
Oh,
Time.
yes.
I've never read it, and I'm halfway through, and it's quite good. Even I'm reading it in English. So I wish I could read it in the original language, but it's terribly long. And so, but it's very good though. It's very good. The length doesn't intimidate me so much, but it's it's very very good. So yeah, so long form, long books. I reread War and Peace this summer. It's a masterpiece. So, but
Mm,
yeah, I will definitely read that. Sounds very interesting.
mm. I think you, as a shrink, would really enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, Crime and Punishment is, if I had to pick, is, and I know it's kind of like a thing of like, oh God, everyone reads that, but I have read it so many times, and in terms of a psychological profile, it's still, I think, the best. I absolutely love that book, and yeah, when I watch films or shows, and definitely when I read novels, I'm always drawn to strong character development. plot doesn't really interest me as much. It's fine. I like a story that has a really good plot as well, but um, character development and different types of characters that are really dynamic and complex. Those are the types of stories I'm typically drawn to. Um, if I had to pick one, I would always pick that over, or even the things I find myself gravitating towards is always those types of stories as opposed to just a very, linear plot, beginning, middle, end. This is what happened. That's fine, but or even non-linear plots, but the characters are always the thing that kind of pull me in. So that's what
I
I really
think
like.
nevertheless you would enjoy Tom Jones. So I may not be selling it very well, but um, he makes a lot of points about human nature, but he makes them through the plot
Hmm,
rather than through the kind of exploration of characters.
hmm,
That's an unusual approach, but he does
yeah.
it extremely successfully.
Hmm.
It just kind of delights you with the artistry of the thing. It's like, wow, he pulled that one now, and now he's done this, and it just fits together. There's nothing extraneous, like every detail in place. The
That's great.
other novel, not an 18th century novel, but the other novel that I always recommend when people ask me for fiction reading,
Hmm.
because I think it is an absolutely perfect little jewel of a novel. Um, it covers a lot of ground in a small space, and not a single kind of detail of it could be different from the way it is. And it's not just because I'm a lover of sci-fi.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a huge lover of sci-fi, but
Me too.
this, but even if you don't like sci-fi, I think it's just a genius novel, which is Ursula Le Guin's *The Left Hand of Darkness*.
Never read it.
Oh wow, it's the I think it's one of it's the only novel I've ever, when I finished reading it, I immediately just turned to the beginning and read it a second time.
Oh wow.
Um, and then I got the audiobook and I was also listening to it on Audible
Hmm,
because I couldn't deal with having finished the idea that I had finished it.
hmm,
Um, and it's an extraordinarily moving book. It has a lot of dramatic irony. It's tragic.
hmm.
It's really,
I love a good
um,
tragedy.
it's a, it's about a relationship with between two characters who are as different as they could possibly be,
Hmm,
literally, worlds and worlds apart.
hmm,
Um, and on the success of whose enterprise depends everything. Everything depends. The
hmm,
fate of an entire planet. Um, and it's the most it seems like the most outlandish premise when you begin the book, and then you realize this story could not have been told in any other way.
hmm, hmm,
Ursula Le Guin's other books are also good, but they're like, this is orders of magnitude better than anything else she wrote.
hmm.
Um,
I will definitely
so,
read it.
mm,
I love sci-fi, especially really good sci-fi. I like the old stuff, and so um, yeah, I will absolutely check it out. I like really good sci-fi. It's I think you can say so many other things that you can't in more realistic fiction or different types of fiction. You can play with different things. I think, and same with fantasy too. So
mm. I don't like fantasy, but I do
no,
like sci-fi.
oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
I don't like I don't like it when things get really supernatural. I
Mm,
don't mind the kind of, this technology is so advanced it's indistinguishable from magic style supernature.
right.
But I don't I I did love Lord of the Rings, and it was a formative experience when I was an adolescent, or earlier than adolescent. I think I was 9 or 10 when I was reading Lord of the Rings. Um, but it's but in general, I don't want there to be fairies.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I get that. I mean, I definitely get fantasy is not. There's certain ways in which it works. There's certain tropes that I can get that are very kind of like not off-putting to people, but it's just not their thing. But I don't love fantasy in that way, but I really do
mm,
enjoy it, and I do think, yeah, I mean, I just reread The Hobbit, so good. But yeah, I think everything is, to me, Lord of the Rings is still top of the mountain for
Mm,
fantasy, and everybody else is just copying him, which is incredible. But
mm, mm.
okay, so let's I guess we'll finish up on the race stuff, and then maybe plunge into a few kind of current things. But
Yes,
so
I'm sorry. I'm extreme. Can be extremely garrulous
no,
when
no,
being
no, no, no,
interviewed.
not at all. Listen,
Um,
it when I talk to people, I'm usually on the giving end of this, so I really like getting that. So I enjoy it as much as I give it out. So
Thank you. I mean, as when I'm hosting a podcast,
Mhm.
I really like it when guests um, are ready to talk a lot.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, me too.
I one of the early episodes I had Razib Khan on, and I
Mhm.
asked him a question about Indian history, and he said, "Okay, to explain this, I need to go back to the beginning." And then he basically spoke. It was like an extempore lecture for
Mhm.
45 minutes on
Oh yeah.
Indian history from prehistory to like the present day. Um,
Raziv
and
is a lovely
it
guy,
was
and he is,
it was lovely. It's
yeah,
so relaxing.
he I his IQ has to be, I don't know, super high. I mean, just I want to download his brain. I mean, he just has so many things in his head, so many incredible things, and yeah, he's a treasure trove of information, and he just
Mm,
and how he connects it all together.
mm.
Raziv is great. Um, so let me just ask after kind of traversing all of the different kind of epochs of your life of sorts, what I guess two questions or two parts. Uh, Racially or ethnically, currently, how do you identify? And does that matter
Hmm.
at all?
Hmm. So, recently I heard Scott Barry Kaufman
Yeah,
talking to
Scott's
Jay
great.
Shapiro, two of my favorite people actually.
Mhm.
And Scott said, "Can I just opt out of this identity business, like opting out of a mailing list? Can I unsubscribe?" Um, and I don't feel that way, but I definitely think it should be opt in by
Mhm,
choice.
mhm,
If you want to um, kind of lean into your racial ethnic identity, you should be able to. If you don't want to, you shouldn't be made to, because I do think that these racial ethnic identities are largely imaginary, which doesn't mean that they're not meaningful to the person.
yes.
So um, we, I, I've sometimes felt in my life this feeling of kind of untetheredness, of just floating in space. I
Mhm,
think it's partly not having family who I'm close to, um, having had this quite sort of a patchwork life, um, and um, I find it really helpful to just. I feel like the Parsi thing is a rope that's been thrown to me,
mm,
and I grabbed onto it. And I grabbed onto it also because just the Parsis are a fascinating group, and they're a wonderful group, actually,
mhm,
a group
mhm,
of overachieving eccentrics
mhm,
um, and philanthropists. And they've had they're a tiny, tiny ethnic group who've had an outsized influence on Indian culture and history.
mhm,
And so I'm proud is maybe the wrong word because it was none of my doing, but um, I think it's a natural thing in the human imagination to want to connect to something bigger than yourself
mm,
because who you are is so unimportant in the universe. You're like, but I can connect to the Parsis, and as a
mhm,
group, the Parsis have been important. Um, and so I'm going to kind of cling on to not exactly a rope, maybe more like a piece of spider silk. Um, and um, but if the kind of web that you've been offered doesn't appeal or speak to you or whatever, like, it didn't speak to Freddie Mercury. He absolutely
Mm-hmm.
he didn't want to be thought of as Parsi or Zoroastrian or whatever, because he wanted to transcend those kinds of parochial identities and
Mm-hmm.
speak to the world at large.
Yeah.
But if that's not your thing, Helen always says, you people who want to play with your race stuff, go over there and play. I'm not interested. I don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that should always be an option for people. And I feel that recently it's often not. It's kind of imposed upon people. You need to think and identify with this group or that group.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it should be choice. Um, and in theory, as much as possible, the ideal would be you can identify with any group you like. But unfortunately, we have to have a way of confabulating the meaningfulness of that identification. Let me put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you do that by saying, I was born that way or in this group and to these people.
Right.
It's very difficult to make it meaningful without that. Some people have.
Mm-hmm.
People have become masters of Japanese kintu soroi
Yeah.
pottery, and so they're like honorary Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
But you can, but it's rare. So I mean, I mostly lean really, really heavily into the Indian Parsi thing, really heavily, and it's like the poor, neglected um, Cinderella stepsister of my identity through most of my life. And now I have sent Cinderella to the ball,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm completely like, all eyes are on her,
Mm-hmm.
and her glass slippers are there. And I, I'm not going to let the clock strike midnight. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to let things turn into pumpkins and white
Mm-hmm.
mice. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I lean heavily into that. I do a kind of British thing. I also feel very British. Um, I um, I drink tea. I listen to Radio Four. Um, Gardener's Question Time is a sacrament in this house. Uh, there's a kind of British aesthetic which I'm very attached to. For me, for example, Christmas is um, Christmas is King's College, Cambridge Choir singing carols, and it is um, Benjamin Britten and Peter Pears, and it is mince pies with brandy butter, and so so there's also a kind of Britishness, but mostly I'm leaning into the Parsi Indian thing. That is the identity that I enjoy kind of feeling immersed in,
Mm.
I guess.
Is it, I hear this a lot, and so I agree with you. And I do like the framing of, you know, opting in or opting out of sorts, right? You're kind of Scott's, can I unsubscribe? It's funny. Um, and I think that that's just my experience and other people similar in some ways is I hear a lot of that kind of discussion coming around people that are mixed race or mixed or multi-ethnic, because I think that for us, there's always this kind of, it's the cards were dealt. That's right, that we were born into that. We didn't have a say or choice in that. I mean, no one has a say or choice in how they're born, anyways. But you know, I can't say I'm more this than this, right? Even if you go down to percentage of sorts, right? I am this and I am this, I am this. I don't have to choose. And I think people that don't, have very obviously or very closely, mixed race or mixed ethnicity, they don't, that's not a question for them that they run into, right? This
Mhm,
choosing, and they
mhm,
don't have choice, or it doesn't seem like they have choice. And so, when Thomas Chatterton Williams, who I love, I think he's wonderful, and I love his perspective and his writing, and what's he say? He's left race and all of that. Um, that makes a lot of people very upset. Makes a lot of people
Mhm.
angry.
Mm.
And I
We
told
need you here in our team. Well, people are angry with Freddie. Well, some people are angry with Freddie Mercury for not emphasizing his Parsi identity enough in
right,
life.
right,
And
yeah.
they were angry about the film Bohemian Rhapsody because it didn't focus enough on Parsi things. I thought
Well,
the film was marvelous, by the way. I wrote a review of it. I was one of the few people who really
mm,
wholeheartedly liked it because I
mm,
thought it messed with some of the detail, the the factual detail, but I thought it was extremely true to the spirit
mm,
of the
mm.
thing,
I
the
mean,
project. But sorry, yes, go
yeah, no,
on.
but I mean about Freddie Mercury. I mean, it's just I think the thing was I've heard that right where he wanted to just kind of transcend that and be very global, which I think he ended up doing.
Mm,
And I mean, no one has even close to that kind of those vocal cords like he did. Is just
yeah,
absolutely amazing. But yeah, so when it comes to like race and ethnicity, I have this. So I hear like Thomas claims, and I've read his stuff and seen his. He's wonderful, but and I agree with that, right? I really do, in one sense. But I think that mm, there's the fact of how do I say it? There's the reality of like how people do operate and maneuver in the world, where they
mm,
do have those boxes, they do have those groupings.
yes,
You can decide to leave it for yourself and say, look, I don't want to play that game. I don't want to play in that sandbox. I don't
mm,
see it that way. It's not a better thing or whatever, but it's a look, judge me by the contents of my character and my individuality. And it's not to say that those elements aren't important or instructive in your life, but it's not the starting line or the defining moment of things. And
and it may not be instructive or important.
sometimes
Also,
no, right?
yeah,
Sometimes no. And I think that that's where people will say, well, but okay, but this is my heuristic, and so you're in this box or this box. And I think the reality of the world in which we live in is still, for better or for worse, is still that. And it's a hard thing, right? Because it's like, yes, I don't. I also think that these are they have some utility maybe, but it's an arbitrary kind of taxonomy we create about race and based on color and then all these things like you talk to some anthropologists, they look at population groups, right? And that's more accurate maybe, but okay, fine, but that's not how the world is, right? People look at, you check race, white, black, you check ethnicity, Hispanic, whatever, and that's not going to change. That's the world we live in. And so I wonder if for folks like yourself or for me or, other people, we're the ones saying a lot of that. But for people that are just white or just, black, African American, or just um, aren't mixed race or ethnicity, they do have to operate in that. Like this is the defined group, this is a defined box. So they don't have these types of ways. I mean, some people do, I guess, but it's more of there's something to that that's very, I don't want to say easy, but it is something that is very tangible. And it's like, yes, I'm white or I'm black or I'm, whichever box you want to check, and then that's it. And I think for other people, where well, I'm this and I'm this and I'm this and I'm this. My dad's here, my mom's here, grandparents are from three different places. Okay, so I'm really who I am is a bunch of different things. For other people, that closely, it's less of that. And so, the final thing I'll say here and is, well, then there's the other parts of for people that I've talked to on this is well, of course, race and ethnicity is important, right? That's part of your culture. And that's, there's music and there's language and there's foods and there's family and there's history and there's traditions and rituals and all those things, right? If you say, I leave race or it's less important, somehow all of that is thrown out as well, which I always say, no, it's not. I don't think that's the case, right?
mm,
But so I don't know. How do you, in terms of, I'm rambling a little bit, but how do you think in terms of a lot of this ideas I hear a lot come from mixed race or multiple ethnicities, people that have multiple ethnicities, and less so of people that don't. Do you think there's something to that in terms of kind of our lens on how we see the world is very um, different shades? Do you think maybe that's part of it, or no?
I do. I mean, I think, as I often say, I don't think being mixed race, which is kind of a misnomer because it implies there are people out there who are somehow racially pure, and that's
Yes, yes.
nonsense.
Yes.
Um, but I think that it's not a merit and it's not a fault, but it can be an opportunity if it's the kind of opportunity you want to take.
Hmm.
Um, and it's an opportunity to show how arbitrary the categories are and how ill-fitting they can be.
Hmm.
Because um, when people are saying that Thomas is black, for example, or Barack Obama is black, um, I I get what they're saying, which is there's always this negotiation between how you see yourself and how society sees you, and um, there are many minefields around this at the moment because there are a lot of people kind of demanding that society prop up their view of themselves.
Hmm.
And society is not going to do that. Other people are not going to be influenced by how you want to be seen.
Hmm.
They will see you the way that they happen to see you, and they will put you in the categories they want to put you in.
Hmm.
And that those might not be categories that you're comfortable with. Um, and there are lots of implications of that in the kind of sex and whole sex gender thing,
Hmm.
but in race as well. Um, so I understand that, but for mixed race people, I find it really weird to say that Thomas Chatterton Williams is black because it implies that he is a different race from his own mother.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so I can't. When I interviewed John R. Wood about this, he
Hmm.
said,
Hmm. Yeah, he's great.
that people always instantly see him as African American. He's more black looking, quote unquote, than Thomas.
Hmm.
Um, And he says he always surprises them by saying, I am just as much white as I am black.
I say the same thing. I say the
Mm,
same thing. My
mm,
dad is an immigrant. At least, I've said before, probably by a lot of definitions, when he came, and currently he's a refugee because of the civil war in Central America. But that's my dad, right? I mean, it's
mm, mm.
and my mom.
Yeah.
So he's Latin, and my mom is a white woman, and so to say, well, you're Latin or Hispanic, it's like, yeah, but I'm just as much that as I am white. I'm
Mm,
legitimately, if you want, 50-50 for my parents, and you know, I don't know if you feel this way, but I always play with that stuff, right? So when I want to, if I'm really late, I'll blame one side of my family, or if I'm really, conscientious, I'll take credit for the other side. I play with it, just kind of in a joking
yes.
way. But yeah, it's same way with John. It's just like, uh, I'm just as much Latin as I am white. I mean,
I, th- yeah, I feel it's a both and situation. So I used to say a lot that I was half Indian, and now I never say that because I feel um, there can't be a kind of half of anything. You can't be sort of divided somehow down the middle.
mhm,
Um, so I am British and I am Indian,
yeah.
and I am European and I am also Parsi.
Hmm.
Um, and um, I think um, that you can't really make too many demands on how society sees you, but you can just try to point out the contradictions
Hmm.
for yourself. And I think that um, the other thing is that I think that you can try yourself to get away from the kind of racial bean counting thing. Um, so I think that you can um, when I'm talking about friends or writers or films or whatever, um, I try not to specify unless it's really specifically relevant.
Hmm.
It's not there's this black writer who I really like or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that we do so much weird we do this weird racial bean counting, which is to discover if something is good or bad, you have to know what proportion of people of which skin color are affected, and that seems to be quite irrelevant.
Hmm.
um, it may be relevant to sociologists for specific high level analysis things,
Sure.
but as far as relieving human suffering, it's completely irrelevant.
Hmm.
It's as if um, people talk, they do this weird reification, by which I mean they use fancy words to make it seem that some abstract concept actually concretely exists out there.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'm using reification the right way, I hope.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But so, but we don't, like, Black people is this thing that is out there and has an opinion and has a kind of, um, is doing well or is doing badly or is suffering or not suffering or has thoughts, has feelings, etc. It's a personification of an abstract aggregate, um, and that is a that seems to me like a really a slippage that leads to some um, odd, well, ways of thinking that are um, that when you think about them explicitly for even a second, you realize how bizarre they are.
Hmm.
So, for example, there seems to be a perception that um, if your group as a whole is doing well, that means you benefit.
Hmm.
Um, so, I see this happening on Twitter all the time, that people say things like, well, you have the privilege of being white, let's say, to someone. You're
Hmm.
white American. White Americans, on average, are much more likely to have inherited money from their parents.
Hmm.
And that's sociologists speak, and it's quite irrelevant to the individual, because if you, the individual, have not inherited money, it doesn't make any difference to you that other people of your skin color have.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, you suffer or prosper as an individual. You live your life as you.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's this really weird proxy kind of thing that goes on. And I can see why it happens, but I think it leads people to lose sight of people's individuality. And it also leads to a lot of kind of heartlessness, because groups don't really suffer, but all individuals suffer. Everybody dies. Everybody eventually, almost everybody eventually becomes old, becomes frail and ill, and has pain, suffering, disease. Um, most people see their loved ones die. Um, there's no identity that kind of insulates you from suffering. The idea of a kind of complete privilege is really a myth. Um, you
Yeah.
can you can be more blessed in some areas than others, but um,
I get the same thing, which is I get what people are saying with that stuff. But again, it's a very poor heuristic because so two things here. I conceptualize this in this way. So people will do this. Everyone does this, and it gets so frustrating at some point where it's like everything's an either or, right?
mm,
And
mm,
and I just think most things are both and, or it's the gray, or it's a complicated mix of things. Like it's not, you know, people aren't that simple, right? And I don't think there are simpletons out there that just everyone is that, right? Because it's like, listen, you we all are maneuvering through the world, and yes, there are patterns and there's behaviors, but we all know, I mean, a priori, we know experientially, people are complicated. Like no one's that simple. No one's that reductionistic, right? So my thing is, to me, people will make the claim, well, you're all about the individual, individual, individual. It's this oppressive, patriarchal, blah, 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 white enlightenment, da, 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 imperialistic kinds of, okay, that's one way of looking at it. To me, and then other people will prop up certain groups, and then all the individualist people will say, like, oh gosh, we have to get rid of all this group think, and we have to get rid of all these things. Everyone fights each other and this stuff. And I think it's both, but I think the order of process is really important. So the way I think of it is the starting line or the starting point has to be basically from the core outward, right? So the starting point is the individual, right? That's where you start. And then as you move outward from the core, then you start to get all of the other pieces of a person's identity, right? Gender, maybe race or ethnicity, country of origin, um, you can go on, physical descriptions, all these things. But I think if you start at the core of who someone is with their being and their individuality, which is only unique and endogenous to them, right? It's the ultimate possessive quality. That's what we should be most curious for. If we start the other way, which I think is what most society is doing at the moment, is let me just look at all of the external particulars first, and maybe I'll get to the individual at some point, is the wrong way of doing it, I think, in terms of the order of process, because it's basically, you're having, I'll use an American expression. I don't know what you have there in England, but it's having a hamburger without the meat, right? You just have the bread and the lettuce and the tomato, and it's like, yeah, it might be full, but I didn't really get to the meat of it, the substance of it, right? It's a poor analogy, but and so I just think people have the order of things backwards, right? I don't think you just start with the individual and then stop there. I do think all the other pieces of a person's life are important and they can be very helpful, but I don't think that one of those pieces, which is what people do. They're taking one aspect within a person's orbit, race, gender, and that is the defining thing. And we're only going to look at this person through that one external variable in their orbit, and you never got to the person. So if you break it down another way, because the problem with this is it's dependent on each person's, right, the other in the person's life perception of how they understand their particulars, right? So for example, if you see me as Latin, let's say, I'm having to deal with
I see
whatever
you
you're.
as Latinx.
Oh gosh, yeah, my Latinx identity. You're dealing with.
Sorry.
I'm dealing with whatever your. I have no idea what your perception is of Latin people, and I have to take in, without knowing it, blindly, whatever your impressions are of Latin people, and I'm either correcting or agreeing or whatever. But there's that element, but the other layer of it is some of those things could totally not be true, right? If all Latin people are predominantly like salsa and bachata and merengue and cumbia, right? As traditional Latin music. But maybe I don't like some of that. Maybe I like I like, jazz and hip hop and trance and techno and heavy metal. Excuse me. If you didn't try to get to know who I am as an individual person, you would have a faulty perception and characterization of me based on an external variable of whatever I'm having to work with, whatever your heuristic is. And then you're having to bump into that with every single person you meet. And everyone has a little bit of a different idea of what those things are. So it goes back to your point about, the Black experience or what it means to be Black. Okay, we have an idea of what African American, culture and tradition is in the United States very loosely, but it's the same thing. You can do this in any group. You can do this with whatever variable. And so that's where I think for me, the starting line is always the individual. That's the starting point. And then you move outward. And I think it's the complete opposite in society, much to our detriment, I'll say one other thing here. I'll let you jump in. I had Angel Eduardo on a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Or maybe it was last week. I don't remember.
Our Ario best-selling writer.
Yeah,
Well, not
he's great.
best-selling, but 10th most read of
Yeah, I saw that. I was
2020.
really happy for him. That was a really good piece, and the one he just put out was really good. He's lovely. And we had a long conversation. I just posted that, I think. And we talked about this, and you'll know this too, right? He's from the Caribbean, or at least his family is. His eggs hatched here, but he's from his family is from the Caribbean, from Dominican Republic. And my dad and my family are from El Salvador and Central America. And then you're not from there, but you live there in Argentina. On principle, and we get into this pretty specifically. In the United States, they're all Hispanic. And sure, there is as an ethnicity, there's a collective of people that there is some things that can be similar: language, religion, music, maybe a few other things. Fine. But as well as I do, those could essentially be different planets of sorts, right? Like how people are in Argentina are wildly different from people in Dominican Republic and wildly different from people in Central America.
Watch Argentines dancing salsa. We used to call salsa the revenge of the foreigners when the salsa tanto came on. Those hips don't move.
You can't, there's not a monolithic kind of group. And so then, right, when that gets imported here to the United States, they talk about the Latin vote. They kind of look at it as like, the black vote. It's like, I don't know what that is. That's a garbage way of looking at things. I mean, I know what people are saying, but you have to understand the specific elements. And if you're over relying on really poor mental shortcuts or shorthands, that's going to get you into trouble. And I think that's my biggest problem with a lot of the grouping as the central focus on these things. So I said a lot. What are your thoughts about some of this?
Well, I think it's the wrong lens, the wrong focal length of lens, literally. I mean, I wear varifocal glasses, so it's as if I'm trying to look at objects close up from the top part of my glasses, which I actually can't even do. I use the glasses very, very automatically. I never think about it, but there's a mid length, there's a far length, and there's a near length. I think it's in Nicholas Christakis's book, Blueprint. He talks about,
book. Yeah.
He uses this metaphor of the three focal lengths. So there is the close-up focus, the individual, and there is the far away, the distant focus, the astronauts eye view, which is humanity. That like that in that corny song, From a Distance. And it's and then there's this kind of middle view, which is groups, stereotypes, statistical tendencies.
Right.
I mean, stereotypes makes it sound damaging, but it can also be just statistical tendencies, let's say, and groupings. And the groupings and statistical tendencies thing can be useful to people who want to see how policies are playing out in society, for example. So it's useful to sociologists and politicians and people like that. Although, frankly, politicians rarely bother to test whether their policies are actually playing out well.
Yes.
That's a whole nother topic.
Yes.
I've just been talking to Michael Story about that. Politicians need to hire Michael Story and the super forecasters to help them get a grip on things. But anyway, the problem is that people are putting on their mid-length focal glasses and looking at individuals with them. And that middle length is basically an area of numbers and generalizations. There's no humanity there. It's a useful tool for calculating things that need to be calculated. but the humanity is in the two other extremes, in the individual focus, person right in front of me, and also in this um, zoomed out focus, the um, homo sum humani nihil me alienum puto. I'm a human, I am a man, and therefore all things human are of interest to me. Nothing human is foreign, alien to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the quotation. I'm a man, and therefore nothing human is alien to me.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two. Those are the two foci where you have where you're really dealing with a human element, and people are just taking this in between thing, which
Mm-hmm.
is cookie cutter shapes and things, and just imposing it on reality at the human level.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good idea.
No, it's not a good
It's
idea because
dehumanizing.
yeah, it's dehumanizing. It's not accurate, and I think it's making us more polarized, and it's making us more. It's harder to find the individual, and it's harder to really see other people and to have more of a compassionate kind of stance with people. Because then, if you grouping is it's dehumanizing, but it's also dissociative. So it's not seeing the individual anymore, right? You're just a box or a bucket or a number or whatever, and it's making us, I think, less empathic and compassionate in the moments and spaces we need to be.
If
Um,
you want to watch it kind of scaled out, anyone who loves science fiction should watch Babylon 5.
yes, I never got
Rewatch it
into it,
regularly.
but I have seen it
Oh,
though. I have seen it, but I've never like
I
start to
think
finish. Yeah.
I think it is the greatest of the sci-fi TV series.
Mm,
And I am also a big Trek fan, but
mm,
Babylon 5 is, to me, is a cut above. But because there it's, oh, the human race are well, not really united, but fairly united, at least as one Earth government.
mhm,
And then, of course, you have us and the aliens.
mhm, mhm.
So there's another level of anthropomorphization or
Mhm,
something. So
mhm,
these are no longer humans.
mhm.
Um, so it's imposing it just it's the wrong lens. It's the wrong pair of
Yeah,
glasses.
yeah.
Um, and no matter how often sociologists on Twitter, including one very handsome one who we both know, who I won't mention by name, um, insists that they're not. They're just talking about statistics.
Mhm,
It just leaks into interpersonal discourse all the time,
mhm,
and it's almost always damaging there.
mhm. Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and um, yeah, I always have to. I gotta pick my battles sometimes, and just find what are the right moments to really kind of stay uh, uh, focused on one thing and on certain debates or engagements. And so, sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. But
You
um,
don't have to respond to everything.
no, no, no. No. That's my
That's the
rule. That's my
key.
rule
Yes.
online. I don't. I see a lot, and I'm
Mhm,
like, okay, that's cool. People can speak their mind, and I don't. I probably don't answer to everything intentionally. So,
mm,
um,
mm.
okay. Before I've kept you for quite a long time, and which has been lovely. The
There's been no
time
there's
didn't
been no
exist.
marijuana.
There's no marijuana. No,
Otherwise,
no.
otherwise it's like a Joe Rogan podcast. But we need to smoke a joint and go to the sauna now.
I know,
You
right?
do have a sauna in your recording studio.
Of course, it's
I
right
hope.
over here. It's right here in the corner.
Yes, yes, I can see.
um, I am curious, just because, again, like I said in the beginning, you have, um, you interact with a lot of people and stuff, and I'm curious also from your perspective. You know, so we're recording. This will probably air and definitely in January, but we're recording this a couple days before the end of the year in 2020, and I just how I have to know this. I know you've lived in the states a little bit. You lived in two different parts of the states, and you've been around the world. Like, how does it fucking look from the other side of the pond of Americans and people in the United States, and this year in particular? So, just as a brief recap, we had a we've had a global pandemic, and the administration fucked it up completely in their response. And then, not entirely, but in many key moments and key parts, especially with all the disinformation. But then we also had this typical American resistance to anything that is being told what to do, such as wearing a fucking mask. And, or all these things, right? And I'm not saying that wearing a mask makes you this virtuous person or whatever, but just basic public health kinds of standards from all states and from the government eventually. And then, we had our presidential elections are, we're the big, loud, noisy neighbors that think our elections are the only ones that matter in the whole world. And obviously, it was a big one this year. And we had that and all the blowback from that and all the post election stuff and all that. And then the racial stuff, right? And the racial protests in the summer and, just all of these things happening. That's just the top three. And there's other things that have happened this year. But, just from from your from your binoculars, your telescope from the other side of the ocean, I mean, what is your sense of all that? I mean, how do you, and you've been here, you've lived here a little bit, but what's your sense of all this stuff?
Well, I do think you Americans are batshit crazy.
Yeah,
That's my
many of us
brief
are.
view.
Many of us are. Yeah.
Um, I think, well, one viewpoint that you might not have heard, which I've certainly heard from my Indian friends, which is if even in the US they're not able to hold their shit together, what hope is there for us? You wealthiest nation cannot keep it together.
Yeah.
What hope is there for us? So I think that is, I sympathize with that view a lot. It's I find U.S. culture, a lot of elements of U.S. culture extremely counterintuitive. Although I find the U.S. very fun. It's a very user-friendly place.
Mhm.
So it's I always enjoy being in the States, and I love my American friends. Um, but I think that some of the things that I find most bizarre. First of all, why don't you have why do you how can you make people pay for healthcare? You don't choose whether you're healthy or ill. So I don't get it. I don't see how it fits in with the kind of choice capitalism in any way.
Mhm.
Oh, I can't afford to have cancer. I'm just going to have a cold. um,
Right.
so there's that. Um, then I think there's also the guns. I just am completely baffled by that.
Mhm.
Um, what, what, what are you playing at?
Mhm.
Just get a giant magnet up in the sky and fly it over the country a few times and suck them all up. Somebody needs to get onto the invention of that. um, and there's also this tremendous kind of, first of all, there's just the most extraordinary myopia in the way in which Americans approach politics, which I really have not experienced from any other country. Um, and you see it in the way that American race politics are kind of projected onto other countries.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
the um, the way in which kind of American categories are projected onto other people,
Mhm.
and also this, you're such drama queens. I'm sorry
Mhm.
to slag off
No,
Americans, but
no, 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 no.
um, when somebody is elected, your president is elected for 4 years, and it's a weaker presidency than the one in Argentina. It's fewer executive powers.
Yeah.
The Argentine constitution is based on the U.S. Constitution,
Mhm.
but the equivalent of Congress and Senate have a lot more power
Mhm.
than in the U.S. Um, so, and usually the way it's set up is that the president and the um, Senate and House of Representatives end up being different
Mhm.
um, parties. Um, and yet you behave every election as though this person will be in power for the rest of eternity. And this is the epoch shifting moment. I understand it a bit better with Trump, who really seems to be a would be authoritarian, and that would-be authoritarians are always dangerous, even in a very robust system.
Mhm.
So your system got stress tested a little bit this
Yeah.
past 4 years.
Mhm.
But I saw that with Obama as well. It's like the new hope, a new age has dawned. I'm like, it's 4 years, at maximum 8 years.
Yeah, people were
Um,
talking about a post-race society because we had a black president. I was like, yeah, that's not happening. And Obama himself said that. He's like, that's crazy. No,
mm,
we're not there yet. Like maybe one day, but that's not there. And then everyone was surprised when we elected Trump and all this racial stuff. It's like that's not going anywhere. Like, dude, I totally agree with you. The sky is falling every 4 years. It's the end of the world, and it's just like, oh my goodness.
yeah.
I
Or utopia is being ushered
or as
in.
utopia is being ushered in. And I told a lot of my liberal friends, I said, when Trump was elected in 16, everyone was losing their mind. And I get it. It was surprising for sure. But I was like, okay, let's give him a shot. I'm not going to vote for him. I'm not a fan, obviously, but I wasn't, beside myself, crying myself this. I was like, we'll be fine. Our country is not a banana republic. It's
Mm.
not, we have so many other systems in place, and yeah, it definitely was stress tested
Well,
and for
here
sure.
again from India, I can only say, if you can't hold it together under Trump, what hope do we have under Modi? I'm not that I'm living under Modi, but you know what I mean. You
Right.
should bloody well hold it together as the kind of big sister of nations.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but also, so you make this huge drama out of it, and then you don't fucking vote.
Oh,
I
listen,
mean, you don't
listen.
even go to the polls. Whenever people have been doing these weird, all this, I think really toxic, poisonous shit about, for example, oh, I can. Is it okay to swear on this
Yeah,
podcast?
say whatever you want.
Okay.
You say whatever you want.
Um, so this talk. So then I let an F word or two fly. This toxic fucking shit about
Right.
kind of the most white women voted for Trump or whatever. I'm like,
Mhm.
it's just over one quarter
Mhm.
because half people didn't even vote at all.
Mhm.
Half of those eligible. So you're talking about you're generalizing a demographic based on first of all based on a vote only, which is voting is not a granular process.
Mhm.
You have two options and you choose which of the two options you think is the least worst option. So there's no point demonizing people for their vote. You've got to separate critique of Trump, which, as far as I'm concerned, can't be harsh enough, with critique of people, the voter, of the electorate, your people, your own fellow citizens, and then also even if that were justified, you're condemning a whole democratic based on the behavior of one quarter. It's just insane. So, and I also feel that there is often this kind of real lack of curiosity. So I'm very shocked by when I was in Miami, which I absolutely adored. That was the only place where people were speaking Spanish.
I mean, you
Um,
were in Little Havana. All the Cubans have been there for
yes,
50 years now, 60
yes.
years.
I was there with an Argentine friend, and I spoke basically only Spanish
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a couple of weeks in Miami.
Yeah.
Was brilliant. But in California, in Arizona, in Texas, everywhere else I went, where there were huge numbers of Hispanics, or even a majority of Hispanics, none of the non-Hispanic people spoke any Spanish. It's like there's no curiosity about. Well, I'm exaggerating here wildly and generalizing wildly, but there's there's a lack of curiosity about fellow citizens, and um, to generalize from a very anecdotal example, but when I was last in Arizona, so one of my friends, her parents are Trump supporters,
Mhm.
and um, the parents had invited us to go over there for the weekend, which was really lovely of them. They were lovely people. And several people said to me, "Are you sure you want to go?" Because they're Trump supporters. I'm like, "Of course I want to go. I'm really curious to meet them and I want to know. I really, I'm not going to." I don't want to create an argument, so I'm careful about how I steer the conversation. But actually, if they want to talk about politics, I would welcome that because I'm really interested to know why they support Trump.
Hmm.
I'm really interested to know. And everybody else seemed to think that the more natural attitude was just don't go near those people. You might find something out about how they think. Um,
Yeah,
Really
yeah. I mean,
odd.
and that's in both sides. I mean, and I told this to
Oh,
people.
yes, yes. Sorry. I mean, I know the liberal side, but I'm not implying it doesn't happen
No,
vice
no, no.
versa also.
Yeah, I mean, I know I have plenty of liberal friends that say they would never be in the same room with someone that voted for Trump. That they would never speak to someone that it just made all these people a pariah instantly because of a vote they had. And I have explained to people, I'm like, listen, a Trump voter is a continuum. That's a spectrum. People do that for totally different reasons. People dislike the man, but they voted for him for Supreme Court stuff or one issue or party or, maybe sometimes the economics. Like there's just so many reasons, like with anyone else. And and conservatives do this as well. I'm not talking to certain liberal people, all these progressives, they're a bunch of commies. I'd never be in the same, same thing. And
Oh, that's also extraordinary. All of this stuff about how the country is sliding into Marxism. I think Helen put it very well when she said she has never, ever seen a country that is less liable to slide into Marxism than the United
It's
States.
the amount of sensationalism and fanaticism. It's like, I had when I was younger, I did classical piano and for 7, 8 years, and I had a Russian teacher, and I mean, she hated communism. I mean, hated it. I mean, you mentioned the word, and you should turn like 40 shades of red. I mean, she was just so allergic to that word, and she hated Putin, and I mean, just really just distaste for it. And again, she lived under a communist country for a long time. And she was much older. It was at least 20 years ago, maybe longer than that. And so, she's probably in her 70s or, at this point. And when, this was a long time ago, but she would say, people would have always thrown that word around, not as much as they do now, but she would say, Americans have no fucking idea what communist or Marxist really is. They have no idea. They really don't. And that's kind of my thing with these kind of anti woke people and all these folks that are just so using the greatest hits of there's a communist behind every single Bush, like it's the 1950s still, and it's just like that Joe Biden, who's the most centrist, boring white dude in our that's currently still there, is somehow a socialist communist, or that the neoliberal Kamala Harris is a communist, which is ridiculous. It's just it's not helpful, and it's not accurate, and it's ridiculous. You just take one
Mm.
small drop in a bucket, and it's just like, see, this is happening every single place in the country. And it's like,
I'd
and it's
like
just
them to, I'd like them to be more Marxist. I mean, just a little bit, not fully Marxist, but just a little further in that direction, like giving people healthcare or something. you know?
well, right. I mean, I would say that there, I think that we've tried to do that. The Roosevelts in our country, they tried to push us to universal health care and better labor laws and better education. And, just things got in the way or people died. But yeah, on both sides of these things, I mean, I'm with you, right? I mean, it's interesting because I'm the nationalist, right? So that was why Rod had me on his channel, and I've written a piece about healthy nationalism, and
Mm.
I love my country, I really do, and I think to be American is an immigrant story. That's kind of my angle, and I think we should loving your country and loving the people that are in it. Not necessarily this kind of we're the best in the world and whatever, not that, but it's like, right, why don't we have a curiosity within our country and curiosity for other countries in the world, in an authentic way, not in a fetishizing kind of way, and how do we you know do well for ourselves and then have good partnerships with other people. And our discourse is just where we can't trust any institution, any news outlet, and can't trust each other, I don't know what we have to work on. It's so frustrating.
Well, we need to think for ourselves, and
Yes.
we have the internet at our fingertips, and we have
Hmm.
so much access to information, and we have the ability to sort it. So this is one of the things that Michael Story and I disagreed on. And
Mm.
I think I've come around to his way of thinking, as I usually do after disagreements with people, um, which is that um, the fact that so many authorities have lost credibility, and especially this year, the WHO, the CDC, Boris Johnson, a bunch of people have lost credibility. Some of them didn't have that much to begin with, but
Hmm.
um, that we shouldn't see that as a problem. We should see that as an opportunity for a kind of new enlightenment, because that's what enlightenment is. It's letting go of the lazy thing of farming out your intelligence to someone else,
Hmm.
getting your opinions by proxy and trusting authority.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I in principle,
mm,
um, I am less
and
sanguine about that with many Americans, though. Um, and it's frustrating because I don't like speaking ill of my fellow citizens, but it is really tough. It is really, really tough having conversations. And maybe much like yourself, my only way in which to try and do this is, you know, having dialogue, having hard conversations, trying to understand people one at a time, maybe, spread it out as much as you can. Um, and try to see, okay, let's hear it. Let's see, let's have those engagements. Um,
mm,
that's the only way I think you can do it. And yeah, I mean, that's what I try and do. I know that's what you try and do. So yeah.
yes,
Well, that's probably a really good stopping point. This was too much fun. It would be nice if it was in person,
yes.
but one day soon. And yeah, you're always welcome. Tell people where they can find you, and where's the best thing to get at you.
Okay, so if you are foolish enough to be on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter at Italia.
Mhm.
Um, and I do limit my Twitter time. I mean, literally, I have a timer and I have a max number of hours per week.
Mhm, it's good.
And I just mention that because occasionally I get people who are deeply offended because I haven't responded to them or within a certain time frame. Um, so I do try to limit number of hours on Twitter, but you can certainly find me there. You can, if you want to read my political writing, it's mostly on my Areo author page. So you can go to AREO and
Mhm,
Iona Italia.
mhm,
And I have about 40 essays or articles.
mhm,
Then you can find my writing about Parsi life in India at fireandvultures.wordpress.com. So if you put in fire and vultures and the word WordPress, you will find it.
mhm,
Um, and then I have three books. I have a book called Anxious Employment, which was published by Routledge,
mhm,
which is still in print.
mhm,
If you want to read a book about 18th century essays,
mhm,
I think it's quite entertaining. It's written for a lay audience. And I have written two books on tango, which are about the sociological and kind of psychological issues that are raised by tango, and it's called Our Tango World. They're not dance instruction
mhm.
manuals, and they're not designed to be only readable by dancers. And you can find the books on Amazon, and I have a 5-star rating on the Amazon Goodreads. So, and you can find my podcast,
Yeah.
Two for Tea.
Mhm,
Um, I have shorter public episodes available, and every month I do one completely public episode, but most full length episodes are for patrons only. You can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. You can subscribe at the minimum rate, and you will get access to all the full episodes on Patreon or Subscribe Star.
Yes, and I've listened to them. They're quite good, and you get a lot of really fun people on there. And so I encourage people to check that out. And yeah, so that's all great. You guys should support her and follow her. She does great stuff. And yeah, it's been really, really nice. I'm glad we were able to do this. And you're always welcome to come on. You try out ideas or anything coming out more current that you have soon. So open invitation always.
Thank you.
All righty.